What's up? How you doing? I am David Long. So there's a fellow in my group, his name is Rasmus. You might remember when he had his debate with Aljoša. I also made my critique of Bernardo Kastrup, basically influenced by Rasmus, because Rasmus is a big Bernardo fan. And of course, after I made that video, I had another talk with Rasmus, and I just came out with this new Sword in the Stone challenge. Every time I talk about emergentism or idealism, there's Rasmus. Like I said, Rasmus is influenced by Bernardo Kastrup, and he was telling me that my previous video on Bernardo didn't fully cover Bernardo's position because a lot of his argument relies on this idea of parsimony. Rasmus didn't really make a ground-up case like the challenge asks, but he does have his own logic. Basically, I think he gets it from Bernardo. So we're gonna sit down with Rasmus today and go through some of this stuff. Big thanks to Sal for hosting, and with no further ado, let's get into it.
Thank you everybody for attending this talk. Obviously, this talk is gonna be mainly about Rasmus's position in idealism. I'm gonna be the host / mediator between them. But before that, I want to talk a little bit about the fact that I might be a little bit biased towards emergentism, but I'll try to not be. Actually, Rasmus himself chose me to be the mediator. He actually suggested this idea. So I think both of them think I'm fair enough. Again, it's not a debate. It's just, let's call it a friendly talk, a discussion to explore some of Rasmus's ideas towards idealism. And from here, I would like to get to Rasmus by saying or asking him, Rasmus, can you first of all give us your definitions? What is your position? What do you find your idealism? How do you define consciousness? And tell us more about or guide us towards your rational case of idealism.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Sal, for hosting this, and thanks, David, for having the conversation with me today. Yeah, I first wanted to establish my debate proposition. That is, it is rational to prefer idealism to non-idealism. And by idealism in this conversation, I mean to refer to the view that all facts are facts about phenomenal consciousness. And in this conversation, I understand phenomenal consciousness to be those properties of experience that constitute what it is like for subjects to have these experiences. And then the argument for the proposition goes premise 1, other things being equal. If theory 1 is more ontologically parsimonious than theory 2, then it is rational to prefer T1 to T2. Premise 2, idealism is more ontologically parsimonious than non-idealism, and all other things are equal. Conclusion, therefore, it is rational to prefer idealism to non-idealism. I think that's what I want to say for now.
Sal, do you want to jump in with this next bit?
Yeah, I would actually say that if you can talk more about the epistemological virtues that is parsimony is part of. As me and Rasmus, we already had offline talks, and he repeatedly mentioned that the idealist position is more parsimonious, all things equal, and that's why he kind of believe it's more a better theory than emergentism. So if you can touch more on that, Rasmus, so we all can understand what are these epistemological virtues.
You want me to state the epistemic virtues?
Yeah, actually, I do have a list for that. David, do you have a list that you can share, or we can just read them? We talked about this before, and I'm also aware that David is familiar with this, with these epistemological virtues. From this article that you shared with me previously, Rasmus, talking about the epistemological virtues. Basically, these are the virtues that are supposed to guide us in forming a theory, but it's an inductive theory. That's a very important piece to know, that it should be an inductive theory. So these are the standards in which we decide if a theory is better or worse than other theories. We got 7 of them, at least in this article that you shared with me previously. The reason why I'm mentioning this is because I really think it's a very important argue point for you, Rasmus, because we keep hearing you talking about that the idealist, or especially your idealist position, the way that you define it today, is better because it's more parsimonious than emergentism. Would you say more about this, Rasmus?
Yeah, well, first of all, in my argument, I'm not talking about emergentism specifically. I'm just comparing idealism to any other proposition that's inconsistent with, as I've defined idealism. What was your question again?
Yeah, my question was more about why do you think that your understanding of idealism is more parsimonious than, let's say, emergentism, since we have David here and he holds the emergentism view. So just if you can make a quick quick comparison, and if it's really all things equal or not equal.
Yeah, well, emergentism just belongs to the category of propositions that I would call non-idealism, by which I just mean the proposition or view that it is not the case that all facts are facts about consciousness. So I'm just going to, I guess, argue why I think idealism is more ontologically parsimonious than non-idealism, as opposed to arguing why it's more parsimonious than emergentism specifically. But I don't have the argument like memorized, so I'm going to find the formalization that I've made here.
So David, would you please read for us what are these epistemological virtues and their definition real quick while Rasmus finds his argument?
Yes, that's a great idea. I will indeed do that. These are the epistemic virtues that should help us to inductively figure out what a better theory is. So number one is explanatoriness. Explanations must explain all the observed facts. Depth. Explanations should not raise more questions than they answer. Power. Explanations should apply in a range of similar contexts, not just in the current situation in which the explanation is being offered. Falsifiability. Explanations should be falsifiable. It must be possible for there to be evidence that would show that the explanation is incorrect. Modesty. Explanations should not claim any more than is needed to explain the observed facts. Any details in the explanation must relate to explaining one of the observed facts. Simplicity. Explanations that posit fewer entities or processes are preferable to explanations that posit more entities or processes. All other things being equal, the simplest explanation is the best. This is sometimes referred to as Occam's razor after William Occam, the medieval philosopher and logician. This is what we're seeing up here a little bit in P1 and P2. Conservativeness. Explanations that force us to give up fewer well-established beliefs are better than explanations that force us to give up more well-established beliefs. So Rasmus's first premise here is other things being equal, which kind of mirrors the Occam here. If theory one is more parsimonious than theory two, then it's rational to prefer theory one to theory two. Right, so that's, would you say that's correct, Rasmus, that number 6 there is what you're pointing at?
I wasn't paying attention, I apologize. Can you repeat it?
That's quite all right. Out of these virtues, I was just saying that like we kind of see the mirror of your P1, P2 conclusion up here. Number 6 says simplicity. Explanations that posit fewer entities or processes are preferable to explanations that posit more processes. All other things being equal, which is very similar to the words you're using up here. The simplest explanation is the best. This is sometimes referred to as Occam's razor.
Yeah, this sounds like what I'm saying.
How is it the most ontological parsimony? How is it the most parsimonious view on your view, would you say?
I gave the argument for premise 2.
Idealism is more ontologically parsimonious than non-idealism, and all other things are equal. I mean, that's just kind of claiming it, right? But why do you think it is that way?
Premise 1 is two theories. T1 and T2 have the same ontological commitments, except that T2 is ontologically committed to Fs and T1 is not. Then T1 is more ontologically parsimonious than T2. Premise 2, idealism and non-idealism have the same ontological commitments, except that non-idealism is ontologically committed to a consciousness-distinct reality, and idealism is not. Conclusion, therefore, idealism is more ontologically parsimonious than non-idealism.
What do you mean by ontological? What was the word you used? Ontological
commitments?
Ontological commitments, yeah. Can you break that down a little?
Don't remember the exact definition, but it says it here in the link to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy article on simplicity. It says here.
So basically, if you include less factors in your...
Yeah, it says here on Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy on simplicity, it says, what does it mean to say that one theory is more ontologically parsimonious than another? The basic notion of ontological parsimony is quite straightforward and is standardly cashed out in terms of Quine's concept of ontological commitment. A theory T is ontologically committed to Fs if and only if T entails that Fs exist. If two theories T1 and T2 have the same ontological commitments, except that T2 is ontologically committed to Fs and T1 is not, then T1 is more parsimonious than T2.
So if we're going to break this down into like what you're talking about in your example with your logic. So you're saying idealism, T1, let's say, non-idealism, T2. You're saying that idealism is saying there's just consciousness, while a non-idealism is saying there's consciousness and there's matter. And so because it's saying that there's other things, then idealism is simpler and therefore better. Is that the idea?
Yes, except that non-idealism, I guess, doesn't necessarily have to be matter, unless you just define matter as something other than consciousness. But yeah, non-idealism entails that there's something other than consciousness. whereas idealism entails that there's only consciousness, and therein lies the parsimony asymmetry.
So what about people who would say on the other side that there's only matter? Why is that not the more parsimonious view? I'm not making that claim. I'm just curious what you would say to that.
Yeah, fair enough. It could be equally parsimonious if you hold a limitativist view, according to which consciousness does not exist, that only matter exists. That view would be equally parsimonious.
Okay, so how do you end up preferring your view over that view?
I would prefer it because I don't think it makes sense to deny that consciousness exists.
Okay, fair enough. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So how do you deny that matter exists?
Because it belongs to the category of being a non-idealist view, which is unparsimonious in relation to idealism.
Rasmus, you just said that your definition of consciousness is like basically everything, right? So
no, that's not my definition of consciousness. No.
Okay. So holding this idealist position does not make you deny materialism, reducing it back to consciousness.
Does my idealist view not reduce? What'd you say? What'd you ask?
Yeah. Does your holding your idealist view, does it make you understand materialism and everything in existence as reducible to consciousness?
I think my view entails if an idealist view that grants that matter exists, that view entails that matter reduces to consciousness.
Right, yeah. Like you said here, all facts are facts about consciousness or something like that.
Yeah. So an idealist view that grants.
What do you mean by fact in that context?
Truth. Anything true.
So you don't think that there's a difference between truth and a fact? For you, they're just synonyms.
By one sense of the word fact, I think it means the same things. It means the same thing. But it's going to depend on what sense of fact you're talking about.
Usually in like if we looked up the word fact right now, it's like a science word. It means something that's been demonstrated and proven to be true. Like,
yeah, take it in philosophy that it's usually going to mean truth.
Well, this is why this is why epistemically we would make a distinction between all these different categories of truth, right? There's subjective truth, objective truth, relative truth, absolute truth, truth as opposed to fact, right? Because something could be absolutely true. It could be absolutely true that something exists over here and we don't know about it yet. We would have to discover it, and then once we discovered it and proved it, then it would be a fact.
Okay.
It might be a fact that it exists whether we know it about it or not, I guess, in an absolute sense. But we would have to discover that for it to be a fact.
Okay. Well,
I just feel like, so I guess I could probably switch now to my criticisms. Yeah? Are we good with that?
Sure. Yeah.
I feel like we're using these words like facts and theories in a very layperson way, right? We're saying that idealism is rational, and we're applying these epistemic virtues to be able to figure out what the better theory is in a more rational way. But what we end up doing is we end up comparing things that are not theories to things that are actual theories, like a scientific theory, which is the only kind of theory there really is a scientific theory. And science trumps logic. You can make a logical case for something, and it could be a valid logical case even, but then we might test it and it might be wrong. There's plenty of things in the history of science that like were valid as logical propositions in a hypothesis, but then the next thing to do is you test that, and then you get empirical data, and then that data is the proof. That's the fact. The measurements are the facts. And then theories are understandings and interpretations of facts that can be tested and then verified themselves. So when you're talking about in your argument here, if theory 1 is comparable to theory 2, well, maybe that's true, but first you'd have to actually get a theory. Right now, like what you have, it seems to me, if you can't make a positive case for your view, if you don't have something that's falsifiable, you don't have something that's falsifiable, you don't even have something that is a logical, valid hypothesis. What you have is an empty claim or an assertion, right? Because for something to be a hypothesis in the realm of science is that you make a logical proposition that can be tested. Then the science and the tests take place. If you put forward an idea that can never be tested and we can never get any proof about it, Like, and it's basically just like a storytelling reframing of the situation that can never be validated. It's just pure assertion, right? So like, this is what I was saying when I said that there's a false equivalency going on. We're not comparing a theory with a theory. We're comparing an unfounded claim with a theory. And like, you were saying something about like wondering if the scientific theory was logical. It's like, for it to be a scientific theory, it first had to be logical. In order for us to test it, to prove it as a theory, in order for it to be the theory, and it is the theory, just like evolution is the theory about biological evolution. There's no other competing theory in the realm of science on this topic. Like, in order for it to be a theory, it has to like establish itself in this kind of a way. And it's grounded in a rational worldview, in logic, in light of all the other theories. Like, that's like the explanatory power part, right? It's not just a leap from everything we experience is an experience in consciousness to then therefore the whole world is consciousness or something. If you're going to make a claim like the world is consciousness and it's all happening in consciousness, you have to like give good reasons to why you think that's the case. Otherwise, what you're doing is you're walking into a room with no history or context as to like where any of these ideas are coming from. And you're just seeing a bunch of ideas on the table. And you're being like, well, what are the pros and cons of all these theories and how can I evaluate them? And in this case, there's not even a good standards for what counts as a theory. There's not even good standards for what counts as a fact. Like, we need to be clear on these definitions so we can do rationality right. So if we're using lay definitions to sneak in anything with no standards and then compare things, that's a false equivalency fallacy. You don't have theory one and theory two. You have an actual theory and an unfounded claim. And until idealists can actually make a ground up positive case for their view, I don't think that they can say that it's a rational position. If Buddhist monks were going into schools and trying to be like, we want to teach our creation myth in a science class, you would have scientists coming out and being like, emergentism is a fact, like they have been with evolution. Like, evolution is the other side of the coin to emergentism. And we have one-to-one correlations all the way at every level of development, like understanding what new biological features allow for what new functions of consciousness. This is a valid theory with explanatory power and falsifiability. If you go through these epistemic virtues, it's like resonating and working with everyone. Explanations must explain all observed facts. If that wasn't the case, it wouldn't be a theory. Depth, explanation should not raise more questions than it answers. I don't think idealism does good on really any of these things. And we can go through them one by one, and I'm sure we will, but I don't want to keep talking and talking. I want to give you a chance to rebut some of this or ask some questions. But even this idea of simplicity, yeah, I don't think it's the most parsimonious view in the light of a physicalist or realist worldview. The actual extra step is to postulate something supernatural, some kind of a larger unknowable entity or consciousness that explains all of this or that it exists in all of this. You're actually postulating an extra entity, which is this mind at large. And I think that if you want to say that it's the same thing as consciousness, then you're doing that leap that I'm talking about of jumping from consciousness as the epistemic primary to claims about what consciousness really is or what reality really is without doing any of the logical ground up work to actually establish that view as even a logical position, let alone a hypothesis or a theory. And I will leave it there.
Yeah. I mean, you made quite a few points there. It's more than I can remember to be able to respond to all of them.
Could I put like bullet points?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Would that be helpful to you? So
I'm saying,
yeah, okay. So I'm saying that there's a false equivalency, which is what my Sword in the Stone video is about trying to demonstrate this false equivalency. Basically, my logic here is that theories are better than hypothesis, and that a hypothesis is better than an empty claim. And this theories are better than a hypothesis, even that, right? That's like basically saying that a hypothesis is like good logic, and a theory is like good logic that has been tested and established, right? So it's better because it's logic plus. So scientific theories that are valid, that stand, that have held over tons of testing and criticism are better than even a logical hypothesis. And I don't think that it's the most parsimonious view, because I do think that you're postulating an extra entity. And I don't think it's grounded in a rational, ground-up logical worldview. That's what makes it a false equivalency, is because there's no good reason to think that idealism is true. It brings nothing to the table. It's not falsifiable. There's no evidence for it. There's no way you could ever prove it. There's no way you could ever test it. It contributes nothing to science. It's just a story, an empty claim.
Okay. I also worry that, and this doesn't address one of these points, but what you said before you made these bullet points, you began by talking about my usage of the word fact and theory. And I worry that we're getting into some irrelevant semantic nitpicks here. I do think semantics are important, but I also do think they're extremely important, but there can still be irrelevant semantic nitpicks. And I worry that this is an instance of that.
If we're comparing theories, then knowing what a theory is pretty important.
Let me just finish, because fact, given that by fact, I just mean truth, and that given by theory, I just mean a philosophical view. I don't see the relevance of, I don't see what the point or criticism is supposed to be, given that we understand what I mean when I use these terms.
Right. Well, the reason why it matters is because this is why these distinctions have been made in the first place. Like when you sent me, when I was like, there's no such thing as a philosophical theory. There are positions. And then you sent me a link and it said philosophical theories. And then the very first paragraph in that thing, it said, these are philosophical theories or positions. And it's the English colloquial use of the word theory, like the lay use of the word theory. And the reason that we don't use the word theory is because we want to reserve that word for specific, I want to say scientific, but let me actually read the quote because I think it'll be better. But yeah, I think it's an important distinction for this exact reason, because basically people want to create this false equivalency and sneak in views that don't count. And this is exactly the point that I'm talking about. So it doesn't matter what you mean when you say these words. It matters what these words mean because we're evaluating theories. If you're saying something that's not a theory is a theory, then it shouldn't be in the running. Like if we're having a beauty pageant or something like that, there are certain requirements to get in. It doesn't meet the requirements. So it says the use of the term theory is a statement of colloquial English and not reflective of the term theory. While any sort of thesis or opinion may be termed a position, right? So here we're not even making a distinction between an opinion and a theory. In analytical philosophy, it's thought best to reserve the word theory for systematic, comprehensive attempts to solve problems. So just because a person has a philosophical position doesn't mean it rises to the level of a theory, right? Because especially in the early days of philosophy, philosophy is born at a time like at the dawn of rationality. It like gives rise to the dawn of rationality. Like logic and science were invented as tools of philosophy by people like Aristotle and stuff like this, right? So of course, there are going to be a lot of ideas that are floating around at that time that make it into the philosophical discourse, but that doesn't mean that they should be considered to be at the level of a theory.
I'm sorry, I'm just not understanding what...
If you take philosophy 101, right? The first thing that they do is they do basically like theology versus rationalism, and they spend like a good amount of time like going in and dealing with the theist positions. Yeah, they're positions, but that doesn't make them scientific theories. And if we're going to evaluate what the best theory is, you have to actually have a theory. Otherwise, you're being like, well, I got a rational case for God over here. I've seen Christians make mathematical cases for God that they were so sure it worked on paper. But like, this is why science trumps logic, because just because you can come up with a logical formula that gets you where you want to go doesn't mean that that's a proof. Logic is like an idea that could work, but we don't know if it's true until we test it. And then once we test it, we verify it, we validate it. Nobody can knock it down. Nobody can disprove it. Now you got a theory. So you see the difference between evolution, let's say, and creationism. One is science, one is a theory. The other is just an empty claim backed up by nothing. It doesn't rise to the level of a theory just because it's a position.
Sure. I worry that it's as if you're treating my argument as if I'm simultaneously talking about theory in a scientific sense and talking about theory in some other sense.
We're evaluating theories,
confusing
right?
the two. Like, I'm not understanding where. Yeah, that's the thing. It seems like you're treating it as if I'm evaluating scientific theories and simultaneously not.
I'm saying you're trying to use rationality, and rationality is looking at facts and theories, and it has certain definitions. If you're going to play the game, you can't apply the lay standards. You have to apply the standards of the rigorous game that's being played. When in the context of this rational epistemology to evaluate theories, you have to be looking at theories. Like, what makes your view any better as in terms of scientific theory or a rational view than that of the Buddhist or that of the Christian creationist? Like, why should your view be considered a theory and their view shouldn't? Or should their view be considered a theory on your view?
I guess so, yeah, it could. It depends on what the proposition is, I suppose.
Okay.
I'm talking about a theory, a philosophical theory, a philosophical view. So if the proposition of some Buddhists, say, expresses the same proposition that is some philosophical view, then yes, but otherwise, no, it's not a theory in the sense in which I'm using the word theory.
If you asked me if there was any reason why my view should be considered a theory as opposed to a Christian creationist, I have a really good answer for that. Like, I'm asking you what the qualitative difference between what your view is and what their view is in terms of should it count as a theory, and your the Buddhist view or the Christian view, a creation myth. Why should your view be more eligible as a theory than theirs?
Well, it's going to depend on what propositions we're comparing. So pick one. Are we supposed to compare my proposition compared to a Buddhist proposition or a Christian proposition? It's going to depend on what the exact proposition is.
We're doing this.
I'm going to answer your question. You're going to have to state the two propositions that I'm going to compare.
Okay, cosmology. Why should they be in the running?
Sorry, I don't understand.
But we're like, the cosmology. Like, why should these views be included and or not? Like, and what's the difference qualitatively between your view and theirs in terms of like rationality, which is what you're saying, right? Why is your view more rationally sound? Okay, we're talking about cosmology. You know what that is, yeah?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm talking about cosmology.
Okay, but you asked for an example.
Okay.
You said because it depends on the question at hand. So I'm saying, okay, hypothetical. We're talking about cosmology, like the origins of reality. Over here we got, let's say, Big Bang Theory. Over here we have Genesis.
Okay.
Should Genesis be considered a theory in the running in this conversation? And if not, why should your view be considered a theory? Like, by what standards? Because that's what these epistemic things are about, right? These categories of how do we evaluate theories? It's based on these categories, right?
Yeah, I'm talking about philosophical views. So if the story about Adam and Eve is not a philosophical view, then no, it's not a theory in the sense in which I'm using the word theory.
Okay, but like, so if there's a philosopher that talks about it, then does it become a philosophical view? What counts as what makes it count? Sure. What makes it count as a philosophical view? Like, what are the criteria for evaluation?
I guess it would have to belong to one of the subtopics of philosophy. I'm not sure how exactly.
So what about like the flying spaghetti monster? I've heard you bring that to the table before. And the whole point of the flying spaghetti monster is to show that this is a ridiculous claim that is completely unfounded and worth rejection. And that this view is no better than the Christian view or whatever. So how is your view any better than the flying spaghetti monster in terms of being considered a valid theory worth considering? And this flying spaghetti monster is a philosophical topic that's brought up by philosophy a bunch of times. Yeah.
So the question was, how is my view better than that theory?
What makes your view worth considering? Because you're saying it's rational. You're saying it should be on the table with all of these other philosophical positions to where it should be considered in the running for like what the best view is. And I'm saying, what I think you're doing is you're just showing up and assuming that it should be there along with any other thing, and then you're just going to pick it. I'm saying the reason it's a false equivalency is because scientists and science in general has put in work to establish this theory and position. It's falsifiable. It has explanatory power. It meets all these criteria that have been brought up. And it seems like you're focusing in on one of the criteria at the expense of all the others, kind of just focusing in on that one. And the crux of this point is that it's about evaluating theories. If T1 is different from T2, and so we're talking about evaluating theories. What makes your view a theory? And if flying spaghetti monster or creationism is also going to be considered a theory on your view, there's a problem with false equivalency.
Yeah, I'll just flag that. Like, I'm not sure why that would be. But
you don't understand. Do you understand there's a difference between
well, I think that's
logic and science?
That's a different point.
Can you grant that a scientific theory is better than a hypothesis?
Well, now I'm not tracking the relevance, right?
Are you serious?
I was trying to understand.
We're talking about what's a theory. It's right there in your argument. It's P2, man. We're talking about P2. This is directly relevant to your logic.
I'm trying to understand. I'm using the word theory, and see, maybe what would be more helpful is if you try to help me understand what the criticism exactly is supposed to be. So first of all, is this supposed to be a criticism of premise 2?
It's a criticism of premise 1 and of premise 2. Let me go back and read premise 1. Premise 1, other things being equal. No, they're not equal. You're comparing an empty claim backed up by nothing that's totally unfalsifiable, that brings nothing to the table, to the dominant theory in science that is undefeatable by scientific standards. I
think you're misunderstanding what all other things being equal means. That's a conditional. That's not stating that other things are equal. That's what P2 is doing. Premise 1 is just stating a condition that if other things are equal, then etc.
Other things aren't equal, and the main reason why is because in
how's that relevant?
Because in P2 you're comparing theories to things that are not theories.
Well, I'm trying to understand if it makes sense for that to be a criticism of premise 1, given that premise 1 is not stating that other things are equal, but that it's stating a condition.
I mean, either way you want to go, if I defeat your premises, your logic is done. And so, you know what?
I'm trying to understand if it actually is.
I'm trying to
understand if your criticism is supposed to be a criticism of both premises, or if it's just supposed to be a criticism of premise 2.
Well, if you want to get technical and say that, like, I mean, like I already said, I don't think it's the more parsimonious view, because I think you're still postulating extra entities. You can't conflate your consciousness, something that we know exists, with mind at large, something that we don't know exists. So I don't think it's the most parsimonious anyways. But it's even if I forfeit P1 and say, okay, yeah, I'll go with that. I'll say that that's true. If I take out P2, which I'm doing here, I'm saying that you don't have a theory, that you're comparing, that this is supposed to be a rational epistemology, and you're bringing in things that aren't rational, things that have no grounding, that you can't even make a ground up logical case for, an idea that's never been justified, that can't be falsified, that has no evidence in favor of it. Like, that's not a theory.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure you understand. When I say in premise 1, other things being equal, do you understand that that's supposed to mean that if other things are equal, etc.?
Sure. I mean, like I'm saying, if I give you P1 and I'll withdraw my criticism from it and say that and move it just basically down to P2 and say that you don't have something equal here because you're not comparing theories, it's a false equivalency, that you're comparing things that are not theories to theories, like you still have to forfeit your conclusion, because like, and just the fact that like that I said you don't have a theory here, and then you sent me a link that says this is that philosophical theories are actually just positions or opinions, and that it's better to use theories, in the word theory, in the context of science, just for this reason. Because basically the whole reason to make this distinction in the first place is so that way, let's say a Christian doesn't do exactly what you're doing. right? Doesn't do, well, I have a theory too. It's like, no, there's a difference between lay language and scientific language. This is why we make a distinction. A theory isn't just something that you can come up with or some position that you can assert. A theory is something that's well established and has been tested and can't be disproven, at least a valid theory. There are theories too that have been debunked or undone, like especially in the early days of science when things were still getting established. Theories have been proven wrong. Like maybe, like for example, race theory could be good logically. Some person could potentially hold that, and they could have logically sound arguments or whatever. But we can test it in reality and be like, no, there are not good one-to-one correlations between these things that you're talking about. Your racist theory over here is debunked, right? So logic isn't good enough. Will you go with me on the back of this demonstration? Will you go with me on this conclusion that a scientific theory is better than a logical hypothesis?
It's going to depend on what justifications there are for the logical hypothesis.
Why would it matter for that? If we have a theory that's been tested and proven and established, why would a logical argument about that thing be better? How is logic better than proof?
I would have to look at the argument.
Can you give me an example anywhere in reality or in life where it would be better to have a logical argument for something than evidence and a valid theory?
Probably not. I don't know. I would just have to.
Probably not.
Yeah, I would have to look at the claim that's being given, and I would have to evaluate the argument for that claim. And yeah, I mean, if the claim is supposed to be that the hypothesis is better than the scientific theory, then I would just have to look at the argument that's being given for that claim and evaluate it. But I can't tell you before I've looked at the argument for the given claim.
Well, you know for a fact that something can be logically valid and not true, right?
Of course.
So logical doesn't necessarily mean true, right?
Of course.
But when you have a undefeatable scientific theory, that has proven itself to be true, hasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if there's a sound argument for a proposition that's inconsistent with a scientific theory that we're taken to be proven, then I would just have to accept that sound argument. I mean, if that's impossible for there to be a sound argument.
Why do you value a sound argument over proof?
If there's a sound argument, if it's impossible for there to be a sound argument for a hypothesis that's inconsistent with a proven scientific theory, I'm not sure that is impossible.
Say that again. I'm sorry, I missed that.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's impossible for there to be a sound argument for a proposition that's inconsistent with a proven scientific theory. Yeah, I'm just agnostic about that.
So you think, okay, so you let me see if I can repeat that back to you. So you think it might be possible to say something that is true, that is in contradiction to a scientific theory?
Yeah, I'm not convinced that's impossible.
Isn't that why we ever appeal to science? Like, person X has stupid race theory, right? And I have a theory that defeats his racism. And I go, look, we have proof, blah, 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 right? And he goes, well, I don't care. I'm not sure that the science that proves me wrong really proves me wrong. It's like, well, what do you do with that? It's like a person who doesn't want to accept evidence, right? I mean, are you, Rasmus, are you making a case of special pleading here, man? Like, are these standards that you're applying to come to this conclusion about idealism standards that you would have across the board for any other thing? Like, let's say you're going to go in and get an operation or something like that. I got the tested methods, and I know, and I have like a falsified theory that has, a history of proof to deal with your thing. Like, is, some person's theory, like, are you going to go with like, I don't know, homeopathy or something like that, because they're both types of medicine or something like this? Or would you make a distinction and be like, I'm going to go with the thing that's like tested and proven versus the thing that like is just a theory that's out there? right? Like you make a qualitative distinction in all kinds of areas of your life. And it just seems like you're making a case of special pleading argument here for idealism when you want to say that like the logical thing is better than or could be better than the scientific theory.
Yeah, I'm just not convinced it's impossible. But anyway, I'm just trying to understand. I just want to understand what the criticism for premise 2 is.
How could I convince a person of something when they don't want to acknowledge scientific proven stuff? What's the relevance of? We're talking about standards again for like what constitutes good ideas, right? And you're saying that I'm not convinced that a valid piece of logic couldn't be true while evidence to the contrary that has been tested and established already disproves it. It's like, well, then what would you say to this person to be able to convince them if this is their way of evaluating things? Like, what could you point to as an authority if you can't point to established scientific theory as good evidence for your claim? I mean, like, what better evidence could you have?
Yeah, if you have a criticism to one of my premises, that
I mean, the criticism is
a proven theory,
that you don't have a theory. You're evaluating things that aren't theories alongside theories, and so you're not really doing the thing. And it's not the most parsimonious claim because you're postulating extra supernatural entities that nobody knows exists.
Okay, yeah, that's one of your criticisms, that idealism. Those
are two takedowns on number 2, right?
Yeah. So let's first get into one of the criticisms, whichever you want to choose. I want to understand at least one of your criticisms to begin with for premise 2.
Do you not understand the first one?
I understand the one about the parsimony. The one about my use of the word theory and false equivalency. I don't understand how that's supposed to be a criticism.
When you sent me the thing about philosophical theories, the very first paragraph in that thing said that the use of the word theory was colloquial or a lay definition, and that it's best to preserve that for doing actual evaluation in this kind of a rational context. So
is that supposed to entail a criticism of premise 2?
Yes, because you don't have a theory. Philosophical theories don't exist. They're just positions. If you want to evaluate a theory, you have to actually get a theory, and your idea doesn't meet the criteria to count as a theory. It doesn't even meet the criteria to count as a hypothesis. It's not testable. It
doesn't meet the criteria. It may not meet the criteria.
Then it's not a theory, so you're not evaluating theories. So it's point 2
but
is
I'm evaluating philosophical theories.
There's no philosophical theories, man. The thing that you sent me.
What's the argument for that supposed to be?
What's that?
What's the argument for that? What's the argument supposed to be that there's no philosophical theories?
The thing that you sent me as a source to justify the idea that there were philosophical theories says in the very first paragraph that it's a colloquial use of the word theory, that real theories are scientific theories, and that this is just a position as good as an opinion, right? So there's a difference between an opinion, someone's idea, and a scientific theory. And someone's idea doesn't count as a theory when you want to evaluate theories. And furthermore, this is like Sal's point, this is just inductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is better and more established. If you like facts and evidence and proof of your position is better.
Are we getting into another? Is this the same criticism? Or are we bring off another criticism?
It's the same criticism. For one, you don't have a theory. And for two, these criteria that you're referencing to evaluate these theories are for inductive theories, not deductive theories. And this goes back to that point that scientific data is better than just a valid argument. Proof is better than logic. Because logic
I'm still just not understanding what criticism is supposed to mean, man.
Okay, so if you come up to your car, right, and you're like, oh, the window in my car is broken and my phone is not here anymore. Like you might be like, let's use some reasoning and be like, okay, well, someone broke my window and came in and stole my phone. Right? That would make sense. Well, like that could be true, but it could also be true that someone hit a baseball and it flew and broke your window and they came and got the ball, and then some dog jumped in your car and stole your phone and jumped out. Okay, it's not that plausible, and it's the other idea sounds more reasonable, but that doesn't make it true. You've already admitted that logic doesn't, just because something's logical and sound doesn't make it true. But if you have a falsified theory, that no one can defeat, it's a pretty good reason to think it's true. Like, evolution is true. Anybody who disputes that is like unreasonable. Emergentism is just the interior correlates that relate to evolution.
Is the criticism supposed to be that there's a false equivalency, or is there something more to it?
There's a false equivalency. You're not evaluating theories. And this is for deductive reasoning. Theories are better than logic. In deductive reasoning based on evidence that we can actually gather and get and prove, those theories are better than inductive theories where we don't have evidence to be able to as easily figure out what's going on. When you have evidence, when you can test it, when you can measure it, when you can prove it, so it's a false equivalency because you're not evaluating theories. And it's also a false equivalency because theories are better than logic.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand how that's supposed to explain how premise 2 is wrong.
Premise 2 is wrong because your idea is not a theory. Even based on the sources that you have given me to show me that philosophical theories are real, in the first paragraph, it says that's a colloquial use of the word theory, and it's not really a theory. It's a position. It's no better than an opinion. Facts are better than opinions. Theories are even better than facts because they're collections of facts. They're falsifiable ideas that all the evidence that has ever been collected or ever will be collected has to jive with. And if there's any evidence to the contrary, it would defeat it. So theories are probably even more like a strong, valid theory that has for example, going back to the evolution example, evolution is so firmly established. There's so much evidence in favor of it. Like, how could you, it's not just a fact, it's a huge collection of facts. If you say that idealism is not a theory, to me that doesn't show that tree 2 is wrong, but it could constitute a criticism that my argument's invalid because then the conclusion would not follow, since the structure of the argument wouldn't be sort of modus ponens. It wouldn't be if P1, if P then Q, P over Q would be if P then Q, R therefore Q, or something like that. Maybe that's supposed to be the criticism. I'm saying that you're using first of all, a cherry-picked criteria out of a list of criteria that your idea wouldn't even begin to satisfy. And it doesn't satisfy that one either, for several reasons. And for two, you shouldn't even be, your idea is not even in the running. It's not even up to the standard to be able to be considered in this conversation, right? It's like, it doesn't even rise to the standards of a theory to be evaluated as a theory with other theories.
Okay, but is your criticism supposed to be that the conclusion does not follow because the structure of the argument would be like if P then Q, R.
The conclusion doesn't follow.
Which would be invalid.
The conclusion doesn't follow, and if you even
in virtue of the faulty logic that I have explicated.
It doesn't follow, and furthermore, in virtue of the failure of P2. And furthermore, if you even want to evaluate your idea in this kind of a context, you have to meet the criteria to be able to have your idea be in the running. This is why my challenge to idealists is to make a ground up logical case for their view, to make sure that they're not making a logical jump without doing any work, right? It's easy to go, oh, well, I only know things through my own experience. And then to jump from that conclusion to, well, then everything is just consciousness. It's like, well, how do you justify that, right? Like your first premises here are like, all facts are facts about consciousness. How do you know that? What work have you done?
I'm just not hearing you answer the question. The question is my argument invalid in virtue of the invalid inference? If P, then Q, R, therefore Q, yes or no?
What is P, Q, and R in this context?
Can I answer this or something?
That's an invalid inference.
Yeah.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Well, Rasmus, I guess what David's trying to say this whole time is your structure as logic. We have like structure and we have content that follows or fill this structure, the valid structure of logic. Your logic is valid when it comes to structure, like, B1, B2, then C, so it follows. But he's arguing that the actual conclusion in the end, it's not gonna state any fact because the content you're using is not correct. One of this is that you're actually using a content assuming that you're talking about a theory that is not even a theory. Your content is not accurate, basically. So yeah, it looks like fine, it looks logical, it follows, but then when we look at the end, we don't have anything that is actually correct, or can, we can, see it's correct. So that's the thing. He's just trying to tell you, you're assuming you're talking about a theory, and because you're assuming that, you're thinking your logic is valid. Well, it looks valid, but the content need to be checked. It's not checked yet because you assumed it's a theory. It's not a theory.
Right.
Does that make sense?
I mean, I'm just not seeing how that shows that P2 is wrong. I think it would show that my argument is invalid if I grant that.
Okay. Then your argument is invalid.
And the reason it would show if I grant that it's invalid is because of the invalid inference that I explicated.
Like
if P, then Q, R, therefore Q is an invalid inference. It's faulty logic.
Is all what you care about now in this moment, is that just to make sure that your logic follows in a valid way?
No, what I'm trying to do is understand where you think my argument goes wrong. And
yeah, we think your argument goes wrong. It's correct. It looks like in structured case, in terms of structure as a logic, it's good. It's doing fine. But
then I'm not understanding what the criticism is.
Okay, then about the content, the facts that inside the structure, inside the P1, P2, C, the facts that are there are not correct.
Okay.
Right, because it's not
a theory.
Premise 2 is wrong. Yes?
Premise 2, I think, is wrong.
Because you assume it's a theory.
Because you assume it's a theory and it's not. And so you're evaluating things in the wrong context. Like if idealism was a theory, then it could be potentially valid, but it's not a theory.
I'm not sure how that shows P2 is wrong. Could you maybe put it?
Because you don't have a theory.
Can you tell us again what is P2?
P2. Idealism is more ontologically parsimonious than non-idealism, and all other things are equal.
Okay, great. Can I stop you here for a second? So you're saying idealism is more parsimonious than non-idealism, and you just stated that non-idealism is, for example, includes emergentism. David is trying to tell you, I assume, is that non-idealism, or at least we're more concerned with emergentism, is already not even just a philosophical theory, it's upgraded to a scientific theory. While here, in this side, you're talking about idealism, it's not even a theory yet. So how do you put these things and say that they're more or less than each other if you're comparing orange and apples?
And I actually, now that I'm looking at his argument, I do think that it's P1, right? Because he's saying P1, other things being equal, if theory 1 is more ontologically parsimonious than theory 2, then it's rational to prefer theory 1 to theory 2. Okay, well, that bit of logic actually might stand, but it's actually turns out to be irrelevant in this context because...
Hence the invalid conclusion, right?
Right. So it's like if P1 is irrelevant to your logic because your idea is not a theory. So
that's what I'm saying. So the inference would be if P then Q are therefore Q, which would be an invalid inference. It seems to me that might be your criticism, not that either one of the premises is wrong. That doesn't make any sense to me.
How do you decide if a premises are wrong or not wrong?
Well, he actually might be right about this. So it's like, it's true that if theory 1 is more parsimonious than theory 2, then maybe it's preferable. And it might be true that idealism is more ontologically parsimonious than idealism. I've already said I don't think that's true because I think it's postulating an extra entity. So I think maybe that's my criticism of P2, is that I don't really think that one stands. And P1 is irrelevant. So you have like P1, which is irrelevant to this topic. P2, which is trying to apply a rational standard to a non-rational theory. Because I mean, and the point here is that idealism isn't rational. I mean, if you can't make a valid logical case for it, especially not I think it needs to be, honestly, it needs to be a ground up case. If you can't make a ground up case from your whatever kind of epistemic primary you want to start with to your conclusion, then you don't have a logical string that actually leads you there. I don't think just some random bit of justification in logic is really good enough. Just like it wouldn't be good enough if a Christian tried to make some mathematical proof for God. No, we need a ground up logical case for us to say that it's rational in the first place. But Yeah, so I don't think that it's more parsimonious. So I think that P2 fails, but and I mean, like, it could defeat your conclusion that way, but it's also true that P1 is irrelevant to your point, and in P2 you're applying standards to theories that don't really apply, so that's also kind of irrelevant. So both your premises are defeated. Your first one's defeated because it's not a theory. Your second one's defeated because it's not more parsimonious, and for one, and for two, because it's epistemic standards that are supposed to apply to theories and that don't actually apply to idealism because it's already been defeated. If you wanted to say that idealism is rational to prefer, then we still need to see some kind of a ground-up case for that, as far as I'm concerned. I think there's no good reason for anyone to believe in idealism, and I've never seen anyone make a positive rational case for it that stands, and I'll say that that's still true.
David, do you understand some basic propositional logic, the formal logic, if P then Q, P therefore Q? Some of those basic formalizations of argument.
I've studied some formal and informal logic.
Yeah, good. So you understand, I put in the chat the argument again with the logic explicated, the formalization, and you see that that's an invalid argument if I put it like that, right?
I'm looking for it. Let's see.
P implication Q, R therefore Q.
Can you break it down for the people at home who might not?
Yeah.
Like, can you just qualify what P and Q and all this?
Yeah. So in propositional logic, one of the most basic logical rules of inference is formulated in terms of the variables if P then Q, P therefore Q. So if proposition P is true, then proposition Q is true. Proposition P is true, therefore proposition Q is true.
Now say it again with the words P and Q replaced with what you're talking about.
Yeah, I formalized the argument in terms of an invalid inference. The argument is premise one, other things being equal, if theory one is more ontologically parsimonious than theory two, then it is rational to prefer T1 to T2. And in brackets, if P, then Q. Premise two, idealism is more ontologically parsimonious than non-idealism, and all other things are equal. And then in brackets, R, conclusion, therefore it is rational to prefer idealism to non-idealism. In brackets, therefore Q. That would be an invalid inference. And I'm wondering if the criticism is supposed to be that in virtue of idealism not being a theory, the logical structure of the argument takes the form of this invalid inference.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make logical sense anymore because point one is kind of irrelevant to your logic.
Yeah, this argument's invalid.
Yeah.
When I formalize it like this, the argument is invalid. It doesn't make any logical sense.
Okay.
So I'm trying to understand if that is what the criticism is supposed to be.
Yeah, the criticism is that you don't have a theory, and parsimony is part of an epistemic approach to validate theories. Even your logic here is applying standards that have nothing to do with the thing that you're talking about. So the whole thing is broken.
It's one of the reasons why you think it's broken in virtue of this invalid inference.
You're talking about
you understand that this, you understand this is an invalid inference that doesn't make any logical sense, right?
Yeah.
P then Q, R therefore Q. Yeah, straightforward. And so I'm trying to say yes or no if this is the criticism regarding the false equivalency, regarding idealism.
Why can't you hear the criticism when it's not presented to you in like this particular kind of format that you're insisting on? Like this
because I'm just not seeing how that is supposed to show that either one of my premises is wrong or that the inference is invalid.
Listen, man, you don't have a theory. This is about and parsimony, even that standard, is about evaluating theories in an inductive context. So you're applying a criteria that doesn't apply to a thing that is like not the thing. So it doesn't follow. I shouldn't need to break it down into a logical formula for you to be able to understand what the criticism is here, right?
Well,
like when we're talking about
that, not understanding criticism. So that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to do that by making it explicit as possible.
Well, explicitly, there are criteria for what counts as a theory. Idealism does not meet those criteria. Therefore, P1 is irrelevant. And your standard here about parsimony in P2 is about evaluating theories. So it's also irrelevant in this context. And your claim that idealism is more parsimonious, I also disagree with that because I'm saying that you're postulating extra supernatural entities, right? So that even if you did have a theory, I don't know how idealism would be a theory since you can't falsify it, right? But even if you did have a theory, this would break your parsimony argument. Even if somehow idealism was a theory, your view still isn't more parsimonious. So it still wouldn't follow. So P1
that's another criticism. I'm just trying to understand this one criticism.
Okay. Just the one criticism is everything you're doing is irrelevant because you don't understand what the words theory and fact and like these important distinctions for being able to talk about rational conclusions in this context are. You're applying standards to things that in order to have this pageant, there's criteria to arrive in it and be able to participate. You didn't meet the criteria. And even if you did show up to the show, you still would be eliminated. That's my point. You don't have a theory. And even if it was a theory, it's not the most parsimonious view. And if we're talking about philosophical theories in this super vague way, then it would make way more sense to be a hard agnostic or a solipsist or something. That's a way more parsimonious view than idealism, because basically you're just saying only I exist. That's the most parsimonious view. Or I don't know. All I can know is my own experience. Maybe that's the most humble view.
I actually think that premise one might, like, if you look at it by itself, is like fine. But the fact that he follows it with premise two, saying that idealism being this T1, for example, is more ontologically parsimonious than non-idealism, in this case going to be like T2, and all other things are equal, is the problem. Because it does assume that what you mentioned in premise one as being the theories are actually the idealism and non-idealism T1 and T2 in premise two. So it's the problem of that. Another problem is in P2, saying that idealism, we just established that idealism is not a theory, to compare it with non-idealism that is actually not just a theory, but actually a scientific theory.
I think you're saying P1 is valid. It's not applicable in this context. So it's like true.
P1 is valid by itself, but when you try, if you just read it by itself, like if there is a theory one and if there is a theory two, but when we try to understand what is this T1 and what is this T2, oh, you say T1 is idealism and you say T2 is non-idealism. No, that here we have a problem, because idealism is by itself cannot be T1, cannot be a theory one. So therefore you have a problem with this. So premise one is correct by itself, but when you follow it with premise two, saying that theory, idealism and non-idealism, substituting it with T1, T2, that's a problem, because it's not a T1. It's probably like H1, hypothesis one, or P1, like position one. It's not a T1. So that's also going to make us arrive to a C that is actually invalid and inaccurate. Like the conclusion is that, therefore, it is rational to prefer idealism to non-idealism. That is not correct. Also, it's not correct for another thing. That is, it's not only through parsimonious that we decide if a theory is rational or non-rational. If he would want to continue with premise 2, 3, premise 4, premise 5, premise 6, and follow maybe all the epistemic virtues, maybe we would want to have a better conclusion. It just simply, the conclusion does not follow. The conclusion does not follow because it's not only through parsimony we decide if something is rational or non-rational. So here's a problem with the conclusion, with C, basically. Another problem is that when you come to premise 2, you substitute these idealism and non-idealism with T1 and T2, we're trying to say that that idealism cannot be equivalent to T1 because it's not a theory in the first place.
Right. So it's actually three criticisms of P2. It's not a theory, which is implied in P1. So that's not true. You're cherry picking criteria because you're only focusing in on the one standard of 7. And even if we were to apply that standard, I'm saying that you're still postulating extra entities, right? So there are three criticisms.
I just first want to hash out one criticism regarding theory and false equivalency.
Okay.
And it does seem to me that the criticism there is supposed to be that the argument instantiates an invalid inference, right? That the logic is bad in virtue of the invalid inference. That invalid inference being, if P then Q, R therefore Q.
Most of the people who are listening are not going to understand that. So instead of saying P then Q and all this stuff, can you replace P and Q with the words like idealism? Are you leaving now too? Can you be like, if idealism is this, like give us the logic, not in the abbreviated form, because other people aren't going to be able to follow that.
I guess I can try to put it in natural language. I'm not sure it's going to be successful. Yeah, I mean, if we formalize the argument like this, it seems that the conclusion would not follow because premise 1 is talking about theories, and idealism supposedly is not a theory. So then
there's like an unstated premise in there, right? So like if the unstated premise might be like between P1 and P2, let's call it like P1.5, idealism is a theory, right? We could put the argument P1.5 fails, and so
I think we could put the argument in a way where one premise is stating that idealism is the theory or something like that.
Yeah, and then that one would fail, and then the logic would fail.
Okay. So
there's other ways the logic would
But
fail,
it-
even
yeah.
if that one didn't fail. But you want to focus on just this one for right now. So that's the one.
yeah, I mean, for me to be able to work with that, we'd have to explicate those extra premises. But it seems to me that to be fine if we just formalize the argument like this in terms of this invalid inference, if P and Q are therefore Q.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that still works to make the point that I think you're trying to make, or at least entail in the point you're trying to make.
Great.
Yeah, and then my question would just be, what's the argument that idealism is not a theory?
Let me look up the definition of the word theory. I have it right here. A scientific theory is an explanation, and a scientific theory is the only kind of theory. That's what we mean in this context when we say theory. So a theory.
And what's the argument for that?
What's the argument for that? I mean, This same thing I was saying before in the terms of a philosophical theory, according to this article that you sent me to justify that there's such a thing as a philosophical theory, that the use of the term theory is a statement of colloquial English, not reflective of the term theory, because we're using official terminology here to describe what we're talking about. So there is a colloquial use of the word theory, but when we're talking about rational theories, we're talking about science. A scientific theory is an explanation of an aspect of the natural world and universe that has been repeatedly tested and corroborated in accordance with the scientific method, using the accepted protocols of observation, measurement, and evaluation of results. Where possible, theories are tested under controlled conditions in an experiment. In circumstances not imitable to experimental testing, theories are evaluated through principles of abductive reasoning. Established scientific theories have withstood rigorous scrutiny and embody scientific knowledge. And what you're saying isn't even falsifiable, right? So it's like, it's not even a hypothesis. It can't be tested. It's just an assertion. It's not a theory. And like, again, I think that it's a case of special pleading, because when anybody else would want to do this, I think you would take issue with it. Like if Christians wanted to say that creationism is just as good as evolution, I don't think you're going to go for that. If you're going to have to go in for some kind of medical surgery and there's like the tested, proven way versus someone's opinion about what might work, I'm assuming that every time you're going to go with the science. And it reminds me of this video I saw back in the day. It's like every debate with creationists.
Okay, stop. I've defeated all your arguments. It's time for you to give up and realize that science has better answers.
Evolution is just a theory.
That's not what it means for something to be a theory. A theory is not just an opinion that someone has. A theory is actually something that's been repeatedly tested and confirmed over and over again. In fact, most scientists speak about evolution as a fact. Give up your debunked idea and join me on the side of rationality.
I'll never join you.
You don't understand the power of science. Science has built almost all this technology surrounding us. You're probably already using technology that was developed through evolution and science in your everyday life.
No. It's not true. That's impossible.
The future is with science. Your outdated religious ideas have been debunked. The world can be beautiful and life can be meaningful even if your religious idea isn't true. And technology built by science can provide us a better world. It's actually science that's really built on a firm ground. It's something that we can really trust. It's reliable. All it takes is that we give up on our outdated views and be willing to work together with the scientific method to be able to actually figure out what's true. Progress and technology and, shit.
These people, they want to basically not give science its due unless they need some kind of medical help or something like that. Then they'll defer to science. So it's like this case of special pleading where I really don't think that you have consistent standards across the board for like what you think counts as truth or like valid things worth citing or whatever. Like in any other argument, if the cases were reversed and you had scientific evidence on your side and someone else just had their opinion, you would point to the scientific evidence and be like, see, my idea is proven right. You're wrong. And you would want them to honor that. And I'm saying if we are in a situation where we can't honor that, where we can't appeal to well-established science as the authority on a topic, I don't know how we can build anything together. I don't know how anyone could ever prove anything to anyone.
So Rasmus, do you feel like you now understand David's criticism more clearly?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think we're making progress.
Great.
Yeah, I guess my question would, I guess I'm trying to understand, or I want to understand what the argument is supposed to be for why how do I phrase this?
Why it's not a theory?
I mean, well, David seems to be denying that there's any like I'm not sure how I can put this criticism in a way that makes sense. So idealism is not a theory. The reason for that is, well, I put the arguments, the scientific theories in scientific theories are an explanation of an aspect of the natural world, etc., etc. It is not the case that idealism is an explanation of the natural world, etc., etc. That's just a definition of a scientific theory. Therefore, idealism is not a scientific theory. It seems like a valid argument. However, if I'm not using idealism in that sense, then the criticism becomes there is no other sense of the word theory.
Yeah, I mean, if this is why we make these distinctions about different grades and levels of reliability, right? We want to be able to make a distinction between what's a theory and what's a fact, and what's an opinion, what's logically sound, what's an empty claim and assertion, and what's just pure nonsense that is just gibberish, like, you know, like there's like a whole spectrum of different levels of strength and validity. And it's important for us to be able to make these kinds of distinctions, because otherwise you end up creating a flatland and a false equivalency where you start comparing empty claims to established theories as if they're on equal ground.
I'm trying to understand why idealism is not a theory, because I'm not making sense of that yet.
Because there's no evidence for it, because it's not falsified. Like, again, if we're doing rationality, right? So there's different steps in trying to figure out if something can be established as truth. Well, first and foremost, the first thing you have to do is be able to come up with a logical assertion of some kind that makes sense. Because if you can defeat something on the logical level, well, you don't even have to test it. It already failed, right? There's some assumed criteria already at foot in just doing logic, right? That we live in a consistent world that's not contradictory and stuff like this. So if you put together a contradictory bit of logic, it fails, right? So there's certain assumptions about reality already built into logic. And those same assumptions get built into science and then tested and then better proven, because science works. And if those assumptions didn't work, then science wouldn't work. But so you establish something is logical. Okay, well, now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to try to test that. So if you don't have something that's falsifiable, then that's the end. That's where it stops. It's just an idea. It's an assertion. Maybe it makes sense, but it's not a hypothesis. There's nothing falsifiable about it. It's just a claim, right? So if you can come up with something that's falsifiable, then we can test that. And then we can establish it. If we get enough evidence for it, then we can prove it, right? So it's like, this is why I'm saying a scientific theory is better than a hypothesis, is better than just a logical statement, because they're more and more and more firm and established as you go down the levels of like testing it and proving it and establishing it. So this is why it's important to understand these distinctions, so that way we don't start comparing things that have no solid ground to things that are well established. And I'm sure that you would probably think that that's an important distinction to make in several other practical matters, right? Like I was saying, like if you had some kind of disease or something like that, now you're going to want to know like what's just a claim somebody made and what's like something that's established, that's proven to work, right?
Well, I'm still just trying to be clear what the argument is for idealism is not a theory. And so this is my question. You see the argument in the comment section. Is that supposed to be the argument for why idealism is not a theory?
Let me look for it. Where's see? A theory is an explanation of an aspect of the natural world and universe that has been repeatedly tested and corroborated in accordance with the scientific method using accepted protocols of observation, measurement, and evaluation of results. P2, it is not the case that idealism is an explanation of an aspect of the natural world and universe that has been repeatedly tested and corroborated in accordance with the scientific method using accepted protocols of observation, measurement, and evaluation. Therefore, idealism is not a theory. True. Yes.
Okay. So I'm just trying to make sense of that argument in light of the fact that I'm not using theory in this sense.
This is the sense in which these ideas are being evaluated. So it doesn't matter what you're doing. If this is not about what Rasmus thinks. These are the epistemic virtues to evaluate theories in a rational context. So your framing of it doesn't matter. If it doesn't meet the criteria, then it doesn't meet the criteria to be evaluated in this context by this criteria. If you can't get past step one of having a theory, then it doesn't matter what kind of theoretical standards you apply to it to try to justify it. It wasn't qualified in the first place. If you want to play the rational game and like say that you're doing rationality, then you have to apply the rational standards. That doesn't mean just having a logically consistent argument. That's only part of it. This is why, again, science is better than logic. Logic can be wrong. Science proves itself. And if you have some firmly established theory, that thing's not going to be wrong.
Yeah. I'm just still at a place where I'm trying to understand how this argument makes sense in light of the fact that I'm not using theory in this sense in which you're using in the argument.
It's not just that I'm using. I'm not coming up with my own special set of definitions here. These are the definitions.
I understand that. I understand that this is a standard
But it's
definition.
irrelevant because you're comparing it with an actual scientific theory. So in this sense, you cannot call your philosophical theory, which is actually a philosophical position, and compare it with an actual scientific theory. In this regard, it's problematic.
This argument seems irrelevant because I'm not talking about the same thing you're talking about in the argument.
Then you're coming up with your own special set of standards and criteria to be able to justify your thing that's not rooted in these epistemic virtues, which again, if you're willing to throw away the standard epistemic virtues that you're saying they're important to appeal to because you'd rather keep idealism, it definitely starts to seem like you don't care that much about what's true. You care more about finding a way to justify idealism, right?
Well, it seems now that maybe the criticism is supposed to be that premise one in my overall argument for idealism is false in virtue of me using the word theory in a sense in which you would take the principle of ontological parsimony.
Yeah, but even if you tried to fix it that way, now you're creating new standards that aren't the standards to...
Yeah, I'm not trying to fix anything right now. I'm just trying to understand what the criticism is supposed to be still. And it seems to me...
It's 1.5. Idealism is a theory, not true, right? Because part of your logic is doing this, like you said, this inference that idealism is a theory, like in position 2, like you say, idealism versus non-idealism in comparison to
it seems that criticism reduces to the criticism that my argument is wrong because premise 1 is wrong, because the sense in which I'm using the word theory in premise 1 in the argument is a different sense from the sense in which ontological parsimony is talking about when
P1 is correct. It's just irrelevant to your argument because what's implied in P1 is that idealism is a theory versus non-idealism, and it's not, right? So there's an unstated premise.
In P1, when I use the word theory, I'm not talking about the word theory.
It doesn't matter what you're talking about. These aren't your standards. These are the standards. So it doesn't matter how you're using it. These, like when you're appealing, no, it doesn't. Because the whole point of your project here is to appeal to these epistemic standards as the authority by which we'll judge these things. And
no, it seems the criticism you want to make. It seems the criticism you want to make is that the premise 1 is wrong because.
No, my criticism is that what you're doing in general is wrong because you're applying standards to a thing that those standards aren't meant for this thing, and this thing isn't meant for those standards. So it doesn't matter how you frame your argument if you're appealing to the standards, and the standards are about evaluating theories with these different standards like parsimony or whatever, like you're applying things with a categorical error, like you're appealing to something as an authority on a topic. Like these epistemic standards are the authority by which we establish what theories are better or not, right? That's the whole point of appealing to something like parsimony, right? You're appealing to these standards, but these standards are meant to evaluate theories. So even if you rework the definition of theory to include what you want it to include, it doesn't matter, because these aren't because your logic being correct in some kind of structure doesn't actually matter as much as if it has something to do with like how things work in reality or not. Again, this goes back to like favoring like science and real things that are proven over just like these logical standards. Like, I think that you're an idealist, not just in the cosmological sense, you're an idealist in that like you're kind of stuck in this world of ideas completely divorced from how the world actually works. You think if you can like construct a map in your head, that's going to be more reliable than how shit actually proves to be. Like,
no, if some scientific theory, if there's a sound argument for some scientific theory that contradicts some other proposition, yeah, then I would want to, grant that. I would want to grant that proposition is wrong.
Okay, so to repeat what you just said, you would want to say that if science proves an idea wrong just because it's logical, you're going to go with science.
Yep.
Okay, then you should be an emergentist, my friend.
Yeah, well, that's another critique. I would love to get into that later.
Because science, this is the valid theory, and there's no competitors, man. There's no competitor. There's not a single scientist that you could possibly find anywhere who's like, I'm doing science over here with idealism. Nope, that's not a thing. I mean, there are people who work backwards from their claims and do pseudoscience and try to prove things right or whatever. But
this is irrelevant though. We want to hash out the first criticism. Okay, so and I worry regarding first criticism that we are talking past each other in the semantics. So
what's the first?
So I'm going to rephrase my argument. Here's a different argument.
Okay.
Maybe the criticism there to that argument, hashing out the criticism in relation to that argument maybe would be more fruitful. I take it to be that the criticism is supposed to be that P1 is wrong. Oh, I don't have it stated.
It's not that P1 is wrong. P1 is true. It's just irrelevant to your point.
Because I don't think that's the criticism I make. It doesn't seem to me, at least, to be that. So I'm going to rephrase it again. The proposition.
Other things being equal, if proposition 1 is more ontologically parsimonious than proposition 2, then it's rational to prefer proposition 1 to proposition 2. Okay, that's your first premise. Let me
let me rephrase it again, actually. Let me rephrase it one more.
Rephrase it again, because I'm already about to break it down.
Cool.
Because if proposition 1 is an empty claim and proposition 2 is a valid theory that's been established and undefeated, then proposition 2 is better than proposition 1. Doesn't matter how simple proposition 1 is. Proposition 2 has already been proven, right? And that's true according to what you just admitted, right?
Sorry, I'm trying to write.
Because I think that there's a case of special pleading. I think we could move the same logic and onto a different topic. Again, like the topic of medicine or something like that. If proposition 1 is more simple than proposition 2, proposition 1 is better. It's like, no. If the claim that homeopathy works is more simple than complicated explanations about how science is going to cure your disease, science is still better than proposition 1, because a valid scientific theory always trumps an empty claim or a hypothesis, because facts and theories are better than empty claims or logic or hypothesis, which is why we've made these distinctions. So other things being equal, if proposition 1 is more ontologically parsimonious than proposition 2, then it's rational to prefer proposition 1 to proposition 2. Already disagreed with that. It's cherry picking the criteria. Yeah, P1's wrong, because it's first of all, it's cherry picking criteria, and second of all, if P1, for example, is just a logical claim or a hypothesis and P2 is a valid theory, then P2 trumps P1 no matter how parsimonious. Facts are better than logic every time.
Was that supposed to be the argument against premise one?
Yeah. And you already admitted it. You've already agreed to this premise that you take science over logic. So if P1, let's say it's a hypothesis, let's say it's even testable, which, you know, idealism isn't, but let's say it is a hypothesis and P2 is a theory, then P2 is better than P1 no matter how parsimonious. Because facts and theories are better than claims and hypothesis. Facts are better than logic. Logic fails, facts are true.
I don't follow.
You've already agreed to it. What do you mean you don't follow?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what the argument against premise one was supposed to be, if there was supposed to be one.
That if you want to switch it and switch the word to proposition or position or whatever versus theory, it still fails because it's a false equivalency, because you're not taking into account the different levels of validity. If P1, again, even if we grant it that it's a valid logical hypothesis, if P2 is proven true, then P2 is better, regardless of how parsimonious P1 is, right? Like let's give an example, right? The car theft example. If P1 is that it's more parsimonious to think that someone broke into my car and stole my phone than it is to think a baseball hit it and a dog came and jumped in my car and stole my phone. Okay, well, that's a reasonable position. On paper, on logic, I agree with that. Yes, it is more parsimonious. It makes more sense. But then if I have a video footage of the person with the baseball bat hitting the ball and breaking your car window and a dog jumping in and taking your phone and then running out with it, regardless of whether it's less parsimonious or not, the evidence trumps the logic, because we know the evidence is true and we don't know the logic is true. So in this context,
I don't think it would be that the evidence trumps the logic. I think there would be a logic implicit in that evidence.
The evidence makes sense. Evidence is logical, but it's better than logical. It still makes sense that a baseball bat could hit a ball and it would break the window, and it still makes sense that a dog could jump into your car. It's just less parsimonious of an explanation, but it still doesn't make it any less the case. And when presented with this evidence, I'm not going to be like, yeah, but it's still more simple of an explanation to believe that someone broke into my car and stole my phone. So even though I see the video evidence that this is what happened, I'm going to go with the logic because it's just simpler. No, this is why we make these distinctions and these different categories, to be able to talk about which claims are more sound and like trustworthy.
Yeah, I'm just not following the distinction between evidence for something and logic and the logical like reasoning.
Yeah, I just gave an example. Use the example. What don't you understand about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure how that example is supposed to be making a distinction, or supposed to clarify the distinction between evidence for something and logic for something. Well,
because the logic was more parsimonious. It makes more sense. If someone told me, no one stole anything from you, this crazy thing happened, I'm going to be like, yeah, right. I don't believe that. That sounds like a bunch of bullshit. But then if someone shows me a video of it happening, I'm going to be like, well, it seemed far out, but I guess it's true. It's less parsimonious of an explanation, but I mean, when presented with the evidence to what actually happened, I have to go with the evidence because I'm clearly seeing that's what happened, while this other thing is just an idea, right? An idea versus a fact, an opinion versus a fact, right? Even if your opinion is logically sound, the proof trumps the sound opinion, because the proof is logical plus evidence.
Right. So we have. Okay. So the claim is supposed to be that evidence is like epistemically superior to logical reasoning?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because if you have evidence, if you have a theory, it started off as logic, and then we proved it. So
yeah,
it was
that's
logic.
the claim. But if that's the claim,
That's more than just a claim.
I don't think that claim makes sense because I'm not granting the distinction within the claim. I'm not granting.
So you're not saying that you're not going to say that there's a distinction between opinions and facts.
No, that wasn't the distinction I was talking about. I was talking about the distinction between logical reasoning and evidence. I don't think.
Okay. What's the difference between opinions and facts and logical reasoning and evidence?
What's the distinction between?
What's
what
the
were
difference? On one side, you have opinions and logical distinctions because your opinion could be logical. And then over here, you have evidence and you have facts, right? You see that facts are better than opinions, right? Just because it's reasonable doesn't mean that you know that it's true. Whereas if you have facts, you know that it's true.
Yeah, I'm just not granting the distinction between logical reasoning and evidence because it seems to me that evidence is grounded within some logical reasoning.
Right. That's why I'm saying it's better because it's done more than just be logical. It's not like I'm saying they're mutually exclusive from each other. We're talking about different levels of grades of certainty that we have, right? On the one side, there's complete gibberish. Then there's, let's say logically coherent positions. You could say, and then there's a hypothesis. There's logically coherent positions that are falsifiable. Then there are facts, which are single measurements, and then there are theories, which are collections of measurements that have been put through rigorous scrutiny and could be proven wrong by any single fact if you could find one. So there are all these different levels. And a valid theory is better than a fact. A fact is better than a hypothesis. A hypothesis is better than just a logical statement. And a logical statement is better than just, like there's a spectrum. And it gets better as you go this way. So it's not that like, well, on one side you have facts and on the other side you have logic. No, you had to go through these different rounds to get something up to the point of a theory. Whereas a logical statement isn't necessarily going through all these different rounds to establish itself as a theory or a fact. It's just an idea. If you can't falsify it, like honestly, if you cannot falsify your idea, if you don't have a falsifiable idea, then it's not worth holding as anything more than maybe it's true, but you shouldn't be certain about it.
So David, how is this can be a criticism to premise one, his new premise one?
Can
you put in the new premise one that he shared with us about position one?
What I'm saying is that it's potentially still creating a false equivalency because we're not making a distinction about the qualitative certainty in which these different positions find themselves. The position one could be anywhere on this spectrum because position is a super vague distinction.
Position or proposition?
Yeah.
Proposition or position. Like a proposition could just be an empty claim, right?
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by empty claim.
I mean, an empty claim is
what do you mean by a proposition, Rasmus? Then what do you mean by
a proposition? Is a statement that is capable of being true or false.
Right. So
it's a statement that has. Yeah.
So an empty claim is just a pure assertion that has nothing backed up. It could be true or false, but it's just a claim, right?
So is it falsifiable?
Like an unjustified belief.
Yeah, what I'm saying is that the proposition really has no kind of, it's completely devoid of this qualitative value that shows how strong the idea is. And when you create a flatland like this, you create a false equivalency, and you end up saying, okay, let's create a false equivalency. Let's create this flatland where we ignored how grounded any of these ideas are. And then I'll apply this one single cherry-picked standard out of a list of 7 to say that the most parsimonious idea is better. And what I'm saying is that basically what you end up doing there is you set up a situation in which just because an idea is simpler, that means it's better. And so all things aren't equal because you're ignoring the ways that they're not.
Wait, that's a criticism of premise 2, right? So now it seems like we're steering off.
Idealism, ontological. Yeah, I mean, no, it's parsimony is in your P1. I mean, you didn't label it as P1 here, but it says other things being equal. So right there in the beginning, if proposition 1 is more ontologically parsimonious than proposition 2, then it is rational to prefer proposition 1 to proposition 2. Well, they're not equal because you're not making a distinction between empty claims and valid theories. And so I mean,
Yeah,
maybe
like criticism of P2. That seems like you're talking about P2, not P1.
the first thing it says in P1 is all things equal.
Other
How-
things being equal.
Okay,
That's a conditional.
How are you making sure that they're equal?
But wait, premise 1 is not stating that things are equal. It's a conditional.
It's
Other things being equal. If
other
other
things-
things are equal. That's
if
what
other
that's
things
supposed
are equal. Okay, well, if you were actually taking these distinctions into account, then P1 could be true. Like if you want to put logical ideas up against each other that are also equally falsifiable, then maybe you could decide which is the least ridiculous unfalsifiable claim or whatever. That doesn't get you a rational claim, but it gets you potentially the least ridiculous. But you got to compare things that are equal. So if you want to compare theories, then you have to compare it to another theory. Otherwise, you're not using this criteria in a good way. If you want to say that, like, we're assuming that we're taking these things into consideration when we say if all things are equal, then I'm good with that. If you're not taking those things into account, then it's not equal. And you're not taking those things into account. You're not comparing things.
Say that last part again, please.
If you're going to include this distinction about the different levels, then I'll say that it's true. But if you're not going to compare things two things of its same kind, then I'm going to say that you're creating a false equivalency and they're not equal. Then you're basically, like cherry picking the data to come to the conclusion that you'd like to come to by creating a false equivalency and then cherry picking a standard that will make the thing that you want to win. I don't think that you're acting with fair overarching standards when it comes to this stuff. You're setting it up in a way that's biased so that way idealism will win. That's why I'm saying also too that I don't think that you have real consistent standards, because I don't think that you would do this kind of thing if it was about your medical health or something like that. You wouldn't. I imagine that you probably are you in favor of these alternative medicines? How do you feel about that?
No, I don't take a view on any of that. I can't comment on any of that.
Can't comment on it. Okay. Well, if your health was in jeopardy, would you prefer to go with the science or with a person's just claims about what they think, I don't know, magic water could do or something like that?
I mean, why not try it? I wouldn't. I'm assuming it's not dangerous. Sure, why not try it? But I wouldn't believe that the magic water would cure anything.
If you had to choose between the two, which would you go with? You get one or the other.
Yeah, with my current knowledge, it's standard medicine.
Yeah, why?
Yeah, because I assume, they've
What if the person who's
come to good conclusions about what's supposed to work for?
Okay, that's good. What if the person who was making claims about the magic water had a more parsimonious argument?
I don't know. I'd have to take a look at the argument.
Okay, it's more parsimonious. Assume it is.
It's more parsimonious than the medical.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Do you really not know?
Well, I would have to look at what the exact arguments are and compare them. I can't really.
So you're saying if the guy with the magic water could come up with a really good logical argument, you're going to go with the magic water?
If he has an argument that defeats
how could it possibly defeat the established scientific evidence about the thing? How does an argument?
I'm not convinced it's impossible.
What's that?
I'm not convinced it's impossible.
I mean, you should be. How can any logical argument, no matter how sound it is in its structure, defeat the evidence?
The evidence in this case that these people who are taking this water are not cured.
Wait, I'm just going to bring this back to the argument.
This is about P1, man. This is about position. This is about, here we are. We're given a real world example. Here's a position 1. This guy believes in magic water. He has a very parsimonious argument. This guy over here, he's a scientist. He's ready to fix your thing. He has well-established history record. Maybe he's also even making an argument that the other guy doesn't work and that a lot of his people die. But hey, his position is very parsimonious.
So P1 is false, or was it going to depend on something?
You're presented with two positions. It's
Yeah. So is P1 false?
P1 is
depend?
false, but it's also more parsimonious. So according to your logic, you would go with P1, even if it is false, because you care more about having a simple argument than you do about having a true argument.
Okay. So what was the question?
Rasmus,
Go ahead, Sal.
Yeah.
no, I just wanted to clarify this. Rasmus, are you asking about the P1 in your new argument, right? Is that what you're
The new
asking,
argument.
David? Yeah,
No,
he's saying that
I was
it's
just
not valid.
trying to. I forgot if we said earlier that P1 was wrong. So I was just trying to remember what the criticism. Was.
Yeah, even
So,
if actually,
yeah,
even if it's like if you change theory with proposition 1 or proposition 2, still the thing is that the conclusion is not going to be valid anyways, because in P2 it's not just that we evaluate something as being a rational or irrational position or proposition or theory or whatever by just seeing if it's parsimonious or not.
It's only
Like-
one of 7
like the-
criteria, man.
It's like the argument between Big Bang or God. Like God seems more simple as an explanation, but Big Bang is seems like a lot of more evidence. The radiation and all of these things that tells us that it's more plausible that it's Big Bang. It's a theory. It's a scientific theory now. So
okay.
and not
which criticism
one
do
thing.
we
One thing I want to add.
Do we want to talk about the criticism that my argument's invalid logically, or do we want to talk about the criticism that P1 is incorrect? It's false.
Well,
there's
I don't want to jump.
Are they
back and
different?
forth.
Are they different? I mean, P1 is
Yeah.
false, so your logic is invalid, right?
That doesn't follow. No, the argument could still be valid if.
I mean, if
Premise not
one
false.
of your premises is broken, then your conclusion doesn't follow, right?
That's
So
not
yeah,
true.
if we talked about,
Wait, wait,
we
wait,
talked
wait.
about the
It
conclusion.
would, however, mean that my argument is not sound, which would make it, which would be reason to reject the argument. Of
Right.
course,
That
but doesn't mean
breaks
the
your
argument is
logic.
invalid. No, it doesn't break the logic. The logic could be fine, but the argument could still be shit in virtue of premise 1 being wrong. So premise 1 is wrong. I grant you.
When you say fine, you mean your conclusion could still be true even if you suck at making a logical
No, no,
proof
no.
for it.
No, if the logic is bad, the argument, the conclusion wouldn't be true in virtue of the argument. So we can't accept the conclusion in virtue of the argument.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. So it's like your conclusion could be true even if you suck at arguing for it and you make a bad premise.
Yeah.
Okay, that's true. But if we're evaluating logic on and that's all you have to work with here, then if your premises fail, then your conclusion doesn't follow. I mean, it could be
Yeah, the
true, but
argument
there's
is
no good
logically
reason
valid.
to think that it's true, especially when you don't have evidence and now you don't have logic, right? So
If
it's
the
So you
argument
have
is
issues with both
logically
cases.
invalid, if the argument is logically invalid, then the argument is shit. If premise 1 is wrong, then the argument is shit. It wouldn't, however, be shit in virtue of the argument being logically invalid, though. Any one of the premises being wrong does not mean that the argument is logically valid. It just means that the argument is shit. It just means it's unsound.
the argument itself
Why
is
would be
shit.
shit?
Okay, so
Yeah.
yeah, okay, fine. So it's not that your conclusion doesn't it couldn't be true, it's just that you haven't made a logically sound argument for your position.
It's not about logic. It wouldn't be sound in virtue of one of the premises being false. The reason it would be shit, the reason it would be unsound, is because at least one of the premises is wrong. But that has nothing to do with logic.
What do you mean? What does it have to do with?
It has to do with soundness.
Aren't we talking about
Isn't
something being
soundness part
logically
of logic?
sound? Yeah.
No, soundness. Well, an argument is sound if the premises of the argument are true and the argument is valid.
So it's interesting when it comes to logic, you're able to make nuanced distinctions about what counts as like these different grades of logical validity, right? So like sound, valid, shit, right? You're able to make these different things. Like maybe it's like, okay, well, in order for it to be valid, first it has to be sound, right? Then for it to be valid, it would have to be validated or something like that, right?
Wait, for the argument to be valid, it first has to be sound. No. The argument can still be unsound if the argument is valid. A valid argument could still be shit in virtue of one of the premises being wrong. In fact, a valid argument, a logically valid argument, is not particularly interesting. It's like the sky is blue, then idealism is true. The sky is blue, therefore idealism is true. The argument is logically valid, but it's still shit. It's still not sound because one of the premises is wrong.
Well, then you have an unsound argument. It's logically
premise
valid,
one is
but it's
wrong.
an unsound because premise
Because
1
premise
is
one is
wrong and the conclusion does not follow from the premises.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So your logic isn't sound.
Wait, why is my logic not sound?
Because the conclusion does not follow from the premises.
And what's the argument for that?
Premise
Explain that.
2, that idealism is more parsimonious. Position 1 or theory 1 is more parsimonious than theory 2, and you said that idealism is more parsimonious than non-idealism. Conclusion is idealism is a rational case. How do you conclude that from parsimony it's a rational? What's the link here?
Yeah.
Why, if something parsimonious equals it's a rational thing to,
Right.
or a national theory?
What about the other 6 criteria?
What if it's
I
not
didn't understand why you
falsifiable?
thought
Right, it's
the
not
argument-
falsifiable. So done.
I wasn't understanding why you thought the argument was logically invalid.
Do you have a single premise that stands?
Maybe not. Does that mean the logic is invalid?
It means you don't have a good logical case for your position.
No, if this means the argument is unsound, it does not mean the logic is shit.
Okay, but it doesn't
What do you
help
mean
your
by shit here?
position. Like
What do you mean by
Of course
shit?
not. No, it doesn't help my position. I'm just trying to get clear on what the conclusion is supposed to be.
Okay, and we're trying to understand. What do you mean by shit? The argument is shit. What do you mean by that?
It's unsound.
It's unsound. Okay, then just use the word it's unsound so we can understand.
Yeah, but you keep using the word
Yeah.
logically invalid when I think you should be using the word the argument is unsound, not
Okay.
logically invalid.
then
That's not the problem. The problem with the argument, if what you're saying is true, is that
why are these
unsound.
why are
That's the
these
problem.
important distinctions to be able to
It is
to tell?
important. Because
I mean,
it's just correct.
You,
It's
okay.
just standard understanding of
Okay,
propositional
okay,
logic.
fair enough.
I mean, I'm willing to go with you on this, right? But
Yeah.
like, you see why I'm asking this, right? Because I'm saying that you think it's important to make these distinctions about soundness versus validity. And
Validity,
stuff. Yeah. Well, this is also why it's important to make a distinction between an empty claim and a hypothesis, or a hypothesis and a fact and a theory. Like, if you're gonna understand the importance of these distinctions when it comes to logic, you should also understand the importance of these distinctions when it comes to science.
That may be fair enough, as long as you can show why premise 1 is wrong. If that's what you're saying, the problem with the argument is
The new premise one or the old premise one?
the new.
I did. The baseball example, you remember?
Yeah.
And I said that
How's that
you're,
supposed to show that premise 1 is wrong?
I demonstrated it with an example. You gave no counter argument. And I said that your logic could be sound if you also built in this distinction about like what constitutes equal if you're comparing theories to theories, or hypothesis to a hypothesis, or logical claim to logical claim. But you can't compare a hypothesis to a theory and come to the conclusion that a hypothesis is preferable.
Was that the argument for why premise 1 was wrong?
Well, I'm saying that it's wrong if you're not making this distinction. If you are making this distinction built into your logic, then it could be true. I would be fine with it logically.
Between what?
Like, if you're comparing like thing with like thing, if you're comparing theories with theories, then yes, then the logic could be sound. But we took away the word theory and we made it position. And these positions could be at a whole bunch of different levels of having established themselves, right? Like, a theory is more established than a hypothesis. So if you're comparing a theory to a hypothesis, we already know just in those categories that the theory trumps the hypothesis, because the theory is proven, whereas the hypothesis is just logical and it could be wrong. Hypotheses are wrong all the time. Theories that have explanatory power and have been around for a long time and have like nothing has contradicted them. Like, for example, things like evolution. It's not going anywhere. You're never going to prove it wrong. We know it's true. It's better than a fact, because a fact is just a single measurement. This is a collection of measurements to create this body of scientific knowledge that is a firm and established truth that is going nowhere, whereas the hypotheses come and go. So back to the point about P1. If you want to compare a theory with a theory or a hypothesis with a hypothesis, I'm fine with P1. But if you're just talking about positions and you're comparing things that don't go together, then no, it's not a good standard.
I'm talking about proposition as like a general category, the general category of proposition.
Right. So that's what I'm saying. I gave an example as to why that's not a good standard. You can have a more parsimonious argument about what happened to your phone, but the video evidence is more valid than a parsimonious argument.
Yeah, I'm not following. Maybe I'm starting to become like tired of something.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do have relatively poor concentration skills. I do suspect I have undiagnosed ADHD, so maybe that's part of what the problem is. We've also been talking about 3 hours. What I suggest we can do is maybe you can write out this criticism, and maybe we can go for a round 2 if you're down for it.
Let me just go through it really quick, point by point, see if I can get you to agree to it in a few steps. Okay. Point 1, it's more parsimonious to think that if you come across your car and your window's broken and your phone is gone, it's more parsimonious to think someone broke your window and stole your phone than it is to think that someone hit a baseball into it and then they came and got the baseball out and then a dog jumped into the car and stole your phone and jumped out and ran away, right? More parsimonious.
It's more parsimonious that someone broke the window, stole your phone, than what was the other alternative? I already lost track of it.
A person hits a baseball, it crashes through your window. They come, they get their ball, but then later a dog comes and jumps into your car and steals your phone and runs out. So you agree?
Yeah, it's more parsimonious.
It's more parsimonious. Okay, but then if someone shows you a video of what happened and it was the second one,
yep,
you're going to abandon position 1 and go with position 2, right?
Yes.
Why?
Because, see how I can articulate it. Yeah.
Because parsimony is not the most important thing.
The proposition regarding the proposition that the first alternative expresses, while it is more parsimonious than the other alternative, other things are, however, not equal. I think that would.
Because the evidence is greater than the logic.
I wouldn't put it like that.
Why not?
I just don't see the conflict being between logic and evidence.
It's not a conflict between logic and evidence. It's a conflict between, in this case, the overwhelming evidence that also does make logical sense. It's not totally out of this world that a baseball could not, or that a dog, like all that's all logical. It's just not as parsimonious. So obviously what we're finding here is that parsimony in logic is not the most important thing. And when presented with evidence, if position 2 has evidence and position 1 only has parsimony,
I agree that parsimony is not the most important thing.
Okay.
And I don't think my argument or any premise of the argument presupposes that it is the most important thing.
But here we've come up with an example in which you would go with proposition 2 as opposed to proposition 1. You just agreed that you would go with proposition 2. So you tell me, does your first premise stand in light of this thing that you just said?
No, is there supposed to be a contradiction or something?
Yeah, because if proposition 1 is more parsimonious than proposition 2, you still went with proposition 2.
Or, I mean, yeah, or do you mean the alternatives?
For theory.
I mean, you put forward a standard, and I showed you a way that your standard doesn't work, right?
I'm not granting that.
Why not?
No.
I guess it's there's a conflict of interest here. Like, I think maybe David is more interested to know what is actually going to be giving us more, what is the true, like the correct answer. But maybe Rasmus is more concerned with if the argument is valid or not valid, sound or not sound, rational or not rational. So in case if we're like more interested in knowing what actually happened, what is actually the truth, then I guess you would go with the videotape, which is a logic plus evidence, than just having a parsimonious explanation, right? If you're concerned with knowing between what's true. But if you're more concerned with evaluating, which one of these arguments are more rational, you would say, yeah, both of them are rational. Obviously, they follow, they look nice, they're valid, and the conclusions are sound. Everything is sound. The premises are good. So yeah. So when you are talking about idealism, are you ever like concerned what is actually the truth out there? Like actually is, like, do you believe that actually consciousness is maybe, primary or the constitute of everything? Or you do?
Yeah, he thinks it's true.
Absolutely.
Okay, why do you have this belief?
I didn't think that was the question. I thought the question was, am I concerned about what is true? I'm not making the claim that idealism is true. I mean, I take the view that it's true. I'm not sure that entails I think it is true.
So are you saying that
that's what I'm exactly saying? That's
are you
exactly
saying
what I'm
it's
saying.
just
You're
your
not
opinion?
interested.
You think it's the most true position? That it's like this is where you're putting
No,
your
it's
money
just
on
the
this.
most rational. No, he's
I
just
don't
saying
know
the
if it's
most
true. I'm
rational.
making the claim. I'm making the claim that it is rational to prefer the proposition
That's
of idealism to the
Rasmus,
non-idealism.
it's not
So it's
rational
basically
to prefer a
the claim I'm
logic.
basically making. The claim I'm basically making is that idealism is the better theory.
It's never going to be a more rational position to go with an unfounded claim over a valid and established scientific theory. Like it's never going to be more
Are we still
reasonable.
talking about premise one? Other things being equal if proposition one is
No,
not
I'm just making a general claim that if you want to come to the best conclusion, that you have to take into account these factors, and that the theory is always going to be more true than any kind of logic that you can come up with.
I want to understand what the criticism of premise one is supposed to be.
Yeah, you're so concerned with this premise, Rasmus.
Yeah.
You're so concerned with what is good about your box of like argument. We're trying to tell you there's some things outside
That's
it
what I
that you
came
need
to
to
do.
understand first.
I came here to do to see if
I just walked you through an example. I just
Your
walked you through an
argument-
example, and the conclusion that you came to was you went with position 2 and not position 1, even though
The
position
videotape
1
thing.
was more parsimonious. Yes, so I immediately came up with a counterexample to show you why you wouldn't necessarily go with position 1. So that defeats your logic in premise 1. Even and like I'm sorry, but the fact that you admitted that you would go with position 2 seems like it has to defeat your premise 1.
So do you think there's a logical inconsistency in my view? That there's a proposition that's inconsistent with premise 1. But that's entailed in my view. Is that supposed to be the question?
You have issues with the premises that you have, at least with one of them, and you have an issue with the conclusion.
And you're acting like you're making a
The
rational
question is,
case.
I'm just not hearing an answer. Look, I'm just not hearing an answer. Is the criticism supposed to be that my view entails a contradiction, where one of the premises that, where the two premises that constitutes the contradiction is inconsistent with the proposition that premise 1 expresses? Yes or no?
It depends on what you mean in the beginning when you say all things being equal. As I said, it is wrong if you want to compare things that are not on the same level of established validity.
I thought you understood what I meant by other things being equal. That means if other things are equal.
I don't know what you mean by if they're equal. Equal in what way? Are they equal in the way that I'm talking about? Is that what you're saying? Are they equal in terms of rational grounding? Are they equally grounded? Are we comparing theories with theories, or are we comparing a logical statement with a theory? Because if we're comparing logic with a theory, then they're not equal. If you're comparing theories with theories, then I'm good with it. Then your thing is sound. But we haven't gotten clear on that yet. Which is also the point of the example I gave, right? Is that these things aren't equal, and you agreed. Maybe we should start to tie this up, especially if we want to go to any kind of emergentism thing.
Yeah, that's what I'm feeling.
Okay.
Too.
Okay.
I'd love to follow up with it.
Go ahead, follow up.
No, I mean some other time. Not right now. Because right now I'm not even sure what to ask or what to say.
You would have to actually come up with something, man. Like, because right now you don't, like, you've already admitted that like you would go with evidence over logic. So unless you can find any evidence for your position or make it falsifiable, then it's not reasonable to hold it.
Well, I asked a question about whether you think a specific contradiction is entailed on my view. You said that was going to depend on what I mean by other things being equal. I said what I meant by that, and then I forget what you.
What did you mean by it? In what way are they equal?
When I say in premise 1, other things being equal, that part just means if other things are equal. So it's not saying that.
I understand it. I'm saying how do you measure if they're equal? Because this is the distinction I've been making this whole time about trying to compare things in a way that's actually equal.
I'm not sure how to answer that. Do you know the phrasing like ceteris paribus?
No, what does that mean?
Yeah, but it's a given premise. It's like it
thing.
should be like a premise. Are you aware of this premise? What is the content of this premise that all things are equal?
Yeah, what does that mean?
Other things being equal. What does that mean?
Yeah.
If all other like relevant considerations are,
so
symmetric, equal.
Like what?
Okay, do you agree that one of this equality
for example,
should be
which would be
not comparing things?
If emergentism, for example, is a settled like scientific question, then I would grant that other things are not equal. That would be an example of things not being equal. But I'm not sure exactly how to explain what it exactly means that other things are equal, or the other things being equal.
Well, if you're willing to agree on this point, that's what it means, that we're saying that they're basically equal. And this could just be one of the things, right? Is that we're comparing theories to theories, and they're about the same topic, and they both have explanatory power. There could be more things that make it equal, right? We'll agree about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But
that could be one of the things in virtue of which the respective propositions would not be equal.
Okay. Well, if we agree that this is what equal means, then I'm okay with proposition 1. But I think we're going to potentially run into the same problem again. Idealism is more ontologically parsimonious than non-idealism, and all other things are equal. Well, they are not equal in this regard. So then your premise 2 is broken, and it doesn't follow.
You could potentially be okay with proposition, or with premise 1, sorry. But I don't really want it to be vague like that. I want it to be like on the table. Like,
well, if you explicitly agree with me, so that these are the distinctions that we're talking about, comparing things that are in the same categories, then I'll go with you on premise 1. But then premise 2 fails because they're not equal. Your idealism and non-idealism are not equal like this. They're not on the same page. So premise 2 is wrong. So it doesn't follow. Right? You would agree. You just agreed, didn't you, that idealism and emergentism are not equal?
I'm not sure I agree to that. I just said, if it's the case that emergentism is like a settled scientific question, that there's a sound argument to be made for it, in other words, then it's not the case that other things are equal.
Right.
And that would make premise 2 wrong. Yeah, I grant that.
Well, okay, then let's just do one more move on that.
I don't grant that there is a sound argument.
Let's help you grant that. Do you think that well-established scientific theories are
Wait, how is this relevant to premise 1 again? Because
it's not. We move past premise 1, although this is reliant upon premise 1 because we're talking about things being equal in the way that we just agreed.
Because you said you granting premise 1 was going to depend on
things
what we were talking about.
Yeah, what we meant by things being equal. And we agreed about that. I thought we agreed about that.
Okay, so what was the agreement?
The agreement about things being equal was that you're willing to compare things in a fair way based on similar categories. For example, we're not going to compare a logical thing to a scientific theory. But that's what happens in premise 2, is you're comparing an unfounded, unfalsifiable claim to the scientific theory and saying that it's better, and they're not equal. And it says specifically that they are equal, but we already agreed in the previous premise that we weren't going to do that. So premise 2 doesn't follow, or premise 2 is broken. It's not true because they're not equal in the way that we just agreed.
Yeah, premise 2 doesn't follow premise 1 because he in premise 1 states that all things are equal, and then in premise 2 here he goes talking about things that are not equal. So how this follows?
I'm just not tracking that. I think I need a break.
Okay.
So are you gonna get your break, or
how are you feeling about this, Al? You having fun?
Not really. It's like taking a lot of time. Like we're on like more than 3 hours just trying to explain in my opinion, a very obvious thing, that we're trying to compare things that are not equal to begin with. And it's a little bit frustrating, but still interesting to understand how maybe other minds or other people think about things, and things that we think are granted or obvious might not be that obvious for the other people. So it is an interesting topic nevertheless. Yeah, I think a repeated theme is that Rasmus or even us are very unable to make a clear distinction between what is just a pure assertion and what is a philosophical theory slash position. And it goes back to this, that he doesn't understand why are they not equal. If both of them are theories, then why are you saying it's not equal? And also another thing is that I think Rasmus is so stuck with, I think he want to come out with this talk with just understanding what's wrong with my position, is it valid or not valid, is it sound or not sound, and is it rational or not, is it rational or not rational, and that's it, bye-bye. But I guess you are more concerned with what does the conclusion say after all, regardless of what it's saying above in the premises. Does the conclusion say anything true? Is it actually true? And that's like a conflict of interest, I'm saying. Yeah. So every time you try to go outside the argument to show him why is it the conclusion is not gonna lead to
Right.
anything useful for us, he goes back, but what about, is it, so I don't understand your
Right.
argument. How is that relevant to
How's that relevant to
understanding?
my premise?
Yeah,
It's like,
how is that relevant to for me to understand what's the issues with my argument? Yeah, it's not relevant to understand the issues, but it's relevant to the talk if you are concerned to knowing, to having, after all, a logical, a valid conclusion.
I'm interested in having consistent standards that will consistently lead me to the truth, not just having a logically sound position. I want to know what's actually true.
Yeah. Also, another thing is that in a deductive type of reasoning, it's not only enough just to show that a premise is not valid, like is not correct or anything in just the way it looks like. It also has to include if the facts are also not correct, and that's, I guess, what we're trying to say here. Yeah, your argument is valid, but the conclusion is not sound, or it's the thing is not sound. Does not cash out to anything that is actually truthful. And yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think about it so far?
Yeah, I agree with you. This is the main issue that we find anytime we have these arguments, is that I think that there's just in general a false equivalency happening, and people are comparing things as if these are all just hypothesis. Like it's all, well, and like people, even like the panpsychists and stuff, do this thing where they're like, well, you don't know everything, so like I guess your theory is just as good as my hypothesis. It's like,
Yeah.
No, we don't need to know everything. It's like the same thing with evolution. You know what I mean? Like there are gaps in our knowledge. There will always be gaps in our knowledge, but we know enough just from deductive reasoning to know what's happening here, to know that evolution is true, to know that this is what it is. And it doesn't even matter if you have gaps in your knowledge, because just from what we know, we can do deductive reasoning and come to those conclusions.
Although, yeah, in these cases, they're appealing to the deductive gap. That, yeah, obviously we cannot know anything. If you're concerned about the ultimate truth, yeah, nobody can know. But if we're practically more concerned about what's practically better to do, yeah, we should ignore a little bit the deductive gap that we always have with science and look at what we still can get from science. Look at all the inventions and all of these things, regardless if this deductive gap is there or not. It's obviously an issue in science, but it's, we can live with this, I guess. Not all issues are being able to be solved.
I'm thinking of like a puzzle, right? It's like you can have a puzzle and put it together and find out that it's missing 5 pieces and still know that it's a picture of a horse, right? And no amount of even filling in those pieces is really going to change the picture. We already know it's a horse.
Or your practical decision or your action. Yeah.
Right. So we don't need to know everything. And this is, I feel like, one of the things that idealists and panpsychists do is they act like until you know everything, well, then there's still enough of a gap in your knowledge to be like, well, maybe my thing is true.
Yeah, and we're justified to stay and believe in what we're believing.
Right. And then
we feel justified to do.
Like an argument from ignorance, like, oh, I don't know how it could be any other way. It's like, okay, but this is why I've made this sword in the stone challenge, is because I want to see people try to actually make a logical ground up case for their view, right? Because this is honestly the bare minimum for something to be considered rational, is you have to at least be able to make a logical case for your position. If you can't do that, then you can't consider it rational.
Yeah, I do have a question I had in my mind for Rasmus. I don't know if he's here or not, but I really want him to tell me, hi, okay. Like, why would you not think that what you call your theory, your idealist theory, why wouldn't you consider it a pure assertion? Like, what is the thing that the qualitative difference that your quote-unquote theory has that you think because of this it's not just a pure assertion? The reason I'm asking this question is because I want to understand, how do you define, what is this limit between this is just a pure story assertion and this is a philosophical theory / position? How do you understand it in your head? Like,
well, if by pure assertion we mean unjustified belief, and I don't think it's an unjustified belief, because I have a seemingly sound argument for my view.
So if we break your argument, so it becomes an unjustified belief and it's pure assertion, and maybe you will question your position?
Sorry, say that again?
If we or anybody else can show you that your argument is either invalid or, not sound or unsound or anything like this, there's an issue with your argument, you would say that, okay, now it's not a philosophical theory, now it's downgraded to just a pure assertion. So basically what you're saying is the line is that whether or not you can translate it into a logical, valid argument.
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I don't think of things in terms of pure assertions, or I tend to not to, at least. But yeah, I mean, I would grant that. If it was shown that the argument is logically invalid and/or unsound, yeah, I would of course grant, or I like to think at least, I would grant that the argument doesn't work, that the argument is unsound.
And then that's, it's not a theory anymore. It's not a valid philosophical position.
Yeah, I'm not sure how we would cash that out. It's not a valid philosophical position.
Well, anything could be a philosophical position, right? There's no criteria for that except for that a philosopher talks about it.
Okay, not valid, just a philosophical position.
I don't know either. I don't know what makes something a philosophical theory except for that maybe some philosopher puts it out or somebody talks about it in a philosophical context.
So there is no qualitative difference between the two things?
You're asking me?
Between what things?
No, I'm asking
Sorry.
Rasmus. Pure assertion, make-up story, God, creation, anything story that David was telling us about today, and philosophical position. Like, what is the qualitative difference? From hearing you, you're saying that the qualitative difference is that philosophical position is that something you can translate into a logical argument. If you cannot, then it's worthless. Is that the difference, the qualitative difference?
Yeah, sorry, I'm not following me. I think my concentration levels may be too poor now to continue the conversation, actually.
So you want to end the talk, or what is it?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe we could try. You can say that again.
I'm trying to understand how you personally decides if something is a philosophical position or it's just a pure make-up spaghetti monster story. Like, what is the difference? How do you define these two things? Why do we have these two categories? How do you define them into these two categories?
Are they two categories, or can they be one and the same?
So we're trying to understand the difference between, or how I view the difference between pure assertions and
philosophical position.
Philosophical positions. Yeah, I'm just not sufficiently clear on what a philosophical position is even supposed to mean, or pure assertion is supposed to mean to be.
So why do you call your position a philosophical position then?
Right.
Can I call it just pure assertion, and you'll be fine with it?
Yeah, maybe I shouldn't call it a philosophical position, which is why I changed the argument to talk about propositions instead.
Okay, fair enough. So when somebody like David comes and gives you a scientific theory, which is emergentism, that is backed with research and one-to-one correlations and all of these things, do you think, not rational, we're not caring about if the argument is more rational or sound or not, we're not caring about this, but what cares about like the practical actual truth in the outside world? What is actually the truth? What is the fact of the matter? Do you think an emergentism have more truth into it than just idealism being a pure assertion?
Do I think emergentism is true? Is that the question?
Is it more likely to be true?
Yeah, if you compare it to a scientific theory like emergentism, like a non-idealist theory.
Right.
Do I think it's more likely that emergentism is true than idealism?
Do you think it's more likely that a scientific theory is true than an empty, unfounded claim?
See, I don't know what an empty, unfounded claim is supposed to mean.
Pure assertion.
A pure assertion or a philosophical theory, or a philosophical theory.
Position,
if you don't know about position, is a philosophical position holds more truth than a scientific theory? That's really the question. Yes or no?
It's going to depend on what philosophical position, I guess.
A philosophical position, by definition, does not have evidence. So it's not logic.
Really? I'm not sure about that.
We already agreed
a second ago that we don't need
it to have any evidence for it to be a philosophical position. I thought we weren't even really able to make a distinction between storytelling and a philosophical position, right? So if you're willing to let the bar of entry to what counts as a philosophical position be so low, and the bar to entry to what counts as a philosophical theory is really high, then probably a philosophical theory is more reliable when trying to figure out what's true than just a philosophical position, right?
I wasn't able to follow.
Can you think
Okay,
of a well-established scientific theory that has ever been wrong?
No, but I would bet there are.
No.
There haven't been any such scientific theories. Can I think of any scientific theory that has ever been wrong? Was that the question?
Or ever been proven to be wrong? I mean, like, people talk about like Newtonian physics or whatever, but it's not wrong. All those things are still true. Everything that Newton said that is considered to be valid science is still valid science. It's just that now we know more. Now we also know things about how the things work on the quantum scale or whatever. So quantum physics doesn't invalidate Newtonian physics. Newtonian physics just works on a particular level, right? This is just one of the examples I can imagine people potentially going to and ask this question.
Why are you mentioning this then? What's the point from mentioning this example?
Well, I'm just saying that like learning more doesn't negate what we've already learned if it's still valid, right? So it's like, I'm just trying to get out ahead of this potential, well, what about Newtonian physics? Now we have quantum physics. It's like, I'm just trying to
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm actually trying to know if it actually matters for Rasmus, would a philosophical position hold more truth than a scientific theory? And you said it depends on the thing, right? Like you need to look at it. But I'm just saying that by the fact that it's actually a scientific theory, it holds more truth to it because it's validated, it's tested, it has data, it has, it is a scientific theory.
Right.
But a philosophical theory, as you said, it's just a position that I can translate in a sound argument.
And
That's
I imagine that when
it
you
could
say,
tell or it could not tell something true about the world, but a scientific theory always tells something true about the world.
and I imagine when you say, I don't know, it depends, I'd want to evaluate them and see what it was, that the standards by which you would evaluate it would be similar to these epistemic criteria that are already built into science. Like, it's not like you yourself, Rasmus, has to invent what good standards are. No, we already have the good standards, right? So unless you're going to criticize scientific criteria and standards for how they come to their conclusions, it seems like you don't have a reason to not accept them. Or like, could you offer counter arguments? Like, do you think that scientific criteria for how they arrive at theories are not good?
I think scientific criteria for how they arrive at theories are not good. No, I don't think so.
You think they're good?
Yeah.
So science has good criteria to establish its theories.
Yep.
Word.
Yeah, Rasmus, do you understand that? I guess maybe me or somebody like David. I mean, even if you come up with a valid piece of argument and it's also sound and everything is great with it, we will still not believe in idealism. And the thing is, because we have a more higher thing that is called scientific theory that is backed up with, facts. So yeah, it does look good. The argument seems valid and sound and beautiful, and the premises are nice and good. But we're still going to go with what is actually practically and actually true, that is said in as an emergentism. So we're more curious to understand, why wouldn't you do the same thing? Like basically, I don't understand. Why wouldn't you also stop believing in idealism and then just believe in emergentism? Without telling anything bad about the argument of idealism, it could be fine and good and sound. That doesn't matter. But when it comes to the real life, why wouldn't you think that, an emergentism theory or non-idealism theory holds more truth?
Seems like you're saying if there's a sound argument for idealism, but if there's also a sound argument for emergentism, and why?
No, I'm not saying this.
Okay.
I'm not saying if there's a sound. I'm not saying if there's a sound argument for emergentism. I'm saying it's beyond sound. It's like it just fact. It's now valid and proven and
how do you
data.
epistemically establish a fact if not via a sound argument?
It starts at a sound argument.
It's sound. I'm just saying it's more than that. Yeah, I'm just saying it's more than that because
what is it that goes beyond it? I don't understand that.
Evidence.
How does
are you defining that sound? Okay, are you defining that a sound argument is one that has a conclusion that is actually true? Like, is that correct?
Sound argument.
Yeah.
Sound argument is an argument that is both logically valid and has true premises.
Logically valid and true premises, but what about the conclusion?
Yeah, I mean, a conclusion is true. A conclusion in a sound argument is true.
Okay, so you're saying if both of them are sound. Okay, so I'm just trying to tell you, if you're saying that idealism is unfalsifiable, how can we ever know that the conclusion is true or not true? If your theory is, as you said previously in the comments in the group, that it's not a scientific theory, therefore it's not falsifiable, therefore the conclusion itself can never be true or false. If we compare it to some other scientific theory that we can actually test the conclusion, we can take it and see outside of in the world, is it true or not true?
It's basically a case of that car again, right? Idealism is this nice sounding thing where it's like, maybe it makes sense, let's say that, hey, it's like just a better explanation that somebody broke into this car and grabbed this phone, and that's just way easier and more simple. But emergentism is the video that shows that it didn't happen like that. And in that context, you went with the video. So by that same logic, why do you not go with emergentism? Why would you go with idealism, even if it was like good logic and parsimonious and all that? If we have good evidence, one-to-one correlations, and like
yeah, I'm not convinced there is a sound argument to be made for emergentism.
No, there is. It doesn't matter if you're convinced, right? Because it's a theory.
If there is, then I would say that the argument for idealism that I make is not sound, because premise 2 would be false if there's a sound argument for emergentism.
Well, the fact that emergentism is a theory proves your thing wrong, and it is a theory. It's the theory. It's the only theory. There's no other theory about this topic in science. No one doing science is coming to a different.
I'm not going into another critique of the argument.
Okay.
I first want to hash out the first critique if we're going to talk about my argument. Because I don't want to bounce back and forth between.
Dude, it's one point like this whole time. It's just that facts are better than logic. Period. Theories are logical. It's not a question.
Now it seems that we're talking about a critique of premise 2. So I take them to be distinct critiques.
Let's put all that shit off the table. Here's the point.
Okay.
All of your logic, all of your arguments, let's get it all off the table. We did that. Here's the thing. Theories are better than logic. That's all you need to know. A theory was based on logic. It was tested. It was proven. If a theory is sound, it's better than any kind of logic that you could have about the thing, because it's better than logic. It's logic plus, whereas logic is just logic, and logic can be wrong, like in the case of the car. And you already said that you would rather go with the evidence, so you should be an emergentist. There's no good reason to go with this other view. It's not rational. You can't make a falsifiable case to it. It brings nothing to the table. It
has a proven
conclusion. I came here to talk about my argument for idealism. So if we're going to talk about
to discuss whether it was rational or not, right?
Yeah.
It's not rational to prefer logic over evidence. Can't be.
What's the critique supposed to be there? Like, to what premises is that supposed to be a critique?
It's just a point. If you want to be rational, if you're trying to be rational, you have to prefer evidence to logic.
Yeah, but David, he's not concerned with that.
Seems like you're making a distinction between the two. Seems like you're making.
I'm talking about graded levels. The better the thing is established, the better it is in terms of reliability. That's what the whole point of the word theory and fact and these things is. You know, it was super important for you to make a distinction between valid and sound logic. Why? Same reason, because these distinctions matter if you want to be rational.
I came here to find out if there's a rational critique of my argument. And so to that end, if there's a critique of
the rational critique of your argument is that it could never be good enough. It could never be good enough because it's completely unfalsifiable. And we already have counter evidence to prove that it's not true. So it's done. Like the real discussions are had on the other side of letting these unfounded claims go. We have proof.
what premise is that supposed to be a critique of?
Dude, I'm not talking about your logic right now. I'm talking about what I'm talking about. Are you here to talk about whether your case is rational or not? You have a more fundamental unestablished set of logical presuppositions that are held underneath even your idea that we should be looking at your logic, right? Because what I'm telling you is your logic doesn't matter. We already have proven that your idea is wrong. Your logic is irrelevant, man. You and your case don't matter. This shit is proven. It doesn't matter if a creationist has really good logic for his belief in God. It doesn't matter. We've already disproven his thing.
It doesn't matter for
his logic doesn't matter. We already know that he's wrong. It's a fact that he's wrong. It doesn't matter what kind of logic or what kind of case or any of that. If he wants to think that he's a rational person, he has to understand that facts trump logic.
I'm just not understanding.
It's a fundamental premise of what it means to be rational, man. You have to understand that facts trump logic. Otherwise,
are you talking about my argument being wrong? Or are you talking about something?
What I'm saying is there's a fundamental logic behind your idea of what it means to be rational in the first place, deeper than your logical case for idealism. And what I'm saying is that if you don't understand that a fact is better than logic, then you don't understand in a fundamental way what it is to be rational. You have to understand this truth about rationality if you want to be rational.
If that's not supposed to be a critique of my argument, I frankly don't give a shit.
Okay, man. Well, it seems like we've come to a stopping place then. It's a definite.
You have no critique of my argument.
Dude,
yeah,
I've broken every one of your premises, man. You have not a leg to stand on, and you don't have a falsifiable case in the first place. I'm over here with the valid theory. I hold all the evidence. You have nothing. You have nothing. You can't even make a logical case for your view, man.
I mean, look, you may have a good criticism on my argument, but in that case, I just don't understand what it's supposed to be.
Well, man, that's an argument from ignorance.
I'm not understanding it.
Well,
an argument from ignorance.
It is an argument from ignorance. Saying I don't understand it is an argument from ignorance.
No.
Look, I don't understand it unless you put it in the right format for me.
Right. If a Christian says I don't understand, I don't understand how something comes from nothing.
I'm not saying my argument is true. I'm not saying my argument is good, true, or correct, or sound, or whatever, because I don't understand what your criticism is supposed to be. I'm just saying I don't understand what your criticism is supposed to be. That's all I'm saying. I'm not making some inference to me being correct or something being correct from that. It's not.
Yeah, I think one of the criticism is that it's like, premise 2, you cannot just decide the conclusion. The conclusion does not follow from the premises. I guess that's the criticism that mainly we have.
I mean, we've gone through the criticisms, but in general, the bigger criticism is that it doesn't matter how good your logic is. We already have the evidence to the contrary, and that trumps your logic.
Yeah, but he doesn't care about this, David. I told you there's like this conflict of interest.
Then don't call yourself rational, and don't pretend to be bringing all of this rational criteria to evaluate theories. You're not rational. You want to believe in this worldview that you have no good evidence for. So like, don't sit there and pretend to be rational. You're a believer, man. If you want to be rational, then go with the sound and established theory that's established by science. If you want to be a believer, then believe in this. This idea that you want to believe in, but don't kid yourself, I
don't give a shit about any of this, man. What's the criticism supposed to be for my argument? What's the criticism supposed to be for my argument?
Dude, we've gone through all that. You don't have your premises. You have a premise that fails in every version of your argument. We've gone through it all, man. And well, even still,
I'd like to follow up.
even if you had good arguments, it doesn't matter. We have proof to prove you wrong.
Yes, but David, what is the issue? Give him just like the one issue you can give in this argument. Can you, the simplest issue?
Where I'm at, I just don't understand what the
premise 2 is broken.
My argument. And
yeah,
it's not equal.
I would like
premise
to
2 is broken.
Talk about that some other time, because right now, I don't think I'm able to have like a conversation where I'm able to focus on the criticisms being made, the arguments being made. But for another conversation, I would love to follow up on trying to understand what your criticism is supposed to be for my argument, if you're willing. That's where I'm at right now. It's not an argument from ignorance. It's just, an invitation for continuing discussion. Sound fair enough?
Man, I don't know. I really don't know, because honestly, if I can't appeal to evidence that proves you wrong, if I can't appeal, no, I mean, I did, and you don't care. So if you don't care about the evidence that proves you wrong and you'd rather just argue about your logic, and whether it's sound or not,
I
like, I don't really have time for that, man. Because you know what? I don't give a shit about, you know what? I don't give a shit about Rasmus's logic. What I give a shit about is what's true and how we can work together to figure that out.
You said something like,
And we can't work together to figure that out if a person doesn't give a shit about
evidence. I think you're strawman. Wait, you're strawman.
Okay, go ahead.
You said something like that I don't care about evidence or something like that. I forget exactly what you said. That's why I'm stopping you as well before I forget. But I don't want you to misrepresent me like that because I don't think that's true. You said something like, I don't know, that you made it seem like
in the micro example, with like the baseball and the dog, it seemed like in that case, in that context, you felt safe enough to say that yes, that you understand that the evidence trumps the logic no matter how parsimonious. But again, it's this case of special pleading where for some reason that's not based in logic or rationality, you want to make a case of special pleading. You want to figure out some way to have special standards where idealism can be the best idea. That basically when it comes to idealism, you're willing to shift the rules so idealism can win. Even to the point where when you get the checkmate on the wording around like what constitutes a theory, when we're trying to like apply these epistemic standards that you've already cherry picked to just this one, you backed off the theory thing and then you went to proposition, and then I showed you, I demonstrated to you, I walked you through point by point, and you agreed, and your premise was defeated. We came up with a counterexample that you agreed upon where you wouldn't go with the parsimony. So like your standards aren't fair, man. You've demonstrated it. You're a believer. You're making a special case for this one thing, and you don't want to be rational around it. You don't want to accept evidence over the logic. So like, what can I appeal to when I'm over here and I have proof that you're wrong?
I don't think it's true that I don't accept evidence. Wait, evidence over? Yeah, I'm just not seeing. I'm not seeing.
In the case of the dog, you were not doing that. I'll grant you that. You picked the evidence, but when it comes to idealism, you're changing up the standards.
I'm not granting a distinction between evidence and logic, in the sense that I think evidence is grounded in logic.
Yeah, it is, but it's better than logic because it's proven.
Look, man, I'm not able to continue this convo. I'm kind of slowly dying here.
I'm seeing that.
So again, where I'm at, I'm just not understanding what the criticism is exactly supposed to be. If we have a talk about it some other time, cool. If not, well, that's that. That's where I'm at. So
yeah, I mean, part of my sword in the stone challenge is just to make this point, and in part because we need to be done with this. We can't just sit around and rehash these old ideas over and over again just because people have them. We've proven that things are wrong, and we should be able to establish that. And that's part of being rational. So to me, if you can't even make a solid logical case for your view, then you shouldn't even kid yourself into thinking that your view is rational. And that is just the bare minimum, because it doesn't even prove that it's true. But if you can't get to the logic, if you can't even establish a logical case for it, then you're truly kidding yourself. And I don't just mean you. I mean, like,
I think I have established the logical case. The logical case I established.
No, dude, we've destroyed that shit.
Even if it does.
Even if it does, we've already proven your view wrong with evidence. Because
the conclusion is not correct.
The conclusion is not correct, even if your logic is good on paper. It's not true. We have the counter evidence. If you want to be rational, you have to accept that counter evidence. I don't get to just postulate my theory and then be like, well, I know that, there are scientific theories, but I'm not going to accept science. I like to think what I like to think. That's wishful thinking.
Yeah, not convinced there's a...
Probably he's having a call.
Willing to work together with the scientific method to be able to actually figure out what's true. Progress and technology and, shit.
Yeah, I guess we need to wrap this up.
Yeah, we need to wrap it up.
You guys are really tired. Let me just say something in the end for maybe concluding it.
Yeah.
Probably what we are seeing here in the big picture of this talk is that, one, you guys have like some deep conflict, like between interests, like interest conflict, right? One side, you're more concerned, as I said before, with what is actually the conclusion that is actually true in the actual reality. And Rasmus is like, as he said, I'm not interested about this. I don't care about this. All I care about is what is your argument for, what is your,
What is your
how
case
is
against my logic?
what is your case against my logic? That's all what I care about. And once I get this, I'm out. I don't care about if it's true, it's not true. If the conclusion I'm giving is actually, true out in the outside world or not true. So that's one thing. And I guess if we want to follow what he wants, that he just want somebody to come and tell him what's wrong with his logic, we can never have talks. We can just write him a paper or something, right? This one is wrong, this one is wrong, and this one is issue here and there. Okay, done. We don't need to talk about it, because these things with these terms and logical terms are not, easily talked. Like, it should be written and premise one, premise two.
Premise two doesn't work. Done.
Yeah. Like, if we can give him this, I think he will be happy, and he will get his criticism done if we can give him this. For now, he doesn't seem like we did give him this, and I think we did, but it's more like it's not very specifically put into the box that is like, how is that an exact point against my premise, this or something like this. So it's not in the right way or the right form that he is wanting, because he needs this form in order to understand exactly how to fix his logic, which
this
is
kind of stuff is better in writing. I agree with you. If we're gonna be strict to the logic, then let's just do it in writing.
Yeah, we can maybe just give Rasmus the paper or the criticism of that written in his favorite correct form, which is the logical form, and then let's call it a day, I guess. I don't know. I don't think we need here to argue about anything, because let's be real. If there's anything to be argued here, it's basically gonna be about, is the conclusion actually says anything true about the world? But it's clearly said that Rasmus, he said, I don't care about this. I just came here to know about my argument. Right? What's your against points? He's not here to do that. We are here to do that. So I guess we should not maybe do any second round. That's just my opinion.
I tend to agree.
I don't know. I'm really interested to know what Rasmus is agreeing or not agreeing on this, so we can wrap this up. Rasmus, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yeah, we can hear you now. Did you hear us say what we just said?
Yeah, I could hear you the whole time.
Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I want to end the convo here. I don't really have anything to say, except for thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Appreciate you.
Likewise.
I like your beard too, man. It's looking good. You should keep growing it.
Oh, thanks. People have been telling me that since I grew it out.
Nice. So with that, I guess I get it back to David, I guess, to conclude this.
Thanks again for watching. Thanks again to Rasmus for coming. Thanks so much for Sal for hosting. Big up to everybody in the group. If you want to support me on Patreon, that'd be great. Buy the merch. All the things. Peace. Idealism is wrong. If you want to be rational, you need to be an emergentist. Okay, bye.